Honourable members, please remain standing for the singing of God Save the Queen, who will be led by Ms. Brooklyn Allard. Please refrain from joining her in the singing of God Save the Queen. Honourable members, please be seated.
Introduction of visitors. Introduction of guests.
Honourable members, before we begin our question period today and our daily routine, as many of you know, I put out a call last week for the second annual Alberta Parliamentarian of the Year Awards, and I'm most pleased to introduce the winners today. While some may criticize such an activity, I think it's important that every once in a while we take the opportunity to remember that we have shared common goals, shared common cause, and bring us together. So if you are able, and you have been declared a winner, I invite you to rise when I call your name. The winners are the most collegial MLA, the member for Calgary North, the best debater, the leader of Her Majesty's Loyal Opposition, the best community outreach MLA, the MLA for Camrose, Alberta's most knowledgeable parliamentarian, member for Bonnyville, Cold Lake, St. Paul, Alberta's best representative of constituents, the MLA for Edmonton South, Alberta's hardest working MLA, the MLA for Lethbridge East, the most promising newcomer, MLA for Edmonton Whitemud, the MLA Lifetime Achievement Award, the Honourable Member for Calgary Hayes, the Minister of Transportation, and lastly, congratulations to Alberta's MLA of the Year, the Honourable Member for Calgary Shaw, the Minister of Children's Services. Honourable members, please join me in congratulating the 2020 Parliamentarian of the Year Awards.
Ministerial statements. Member statements.
The Honourable Member for Lethbridge West.
Thank you. The Heritage Fund is $17 billion of Albertans' savings. And like any savings, it's invested so it'll grow and give us some income. The fund is managed by AIMCO. They get paid to give us returns that are more than just sticking it in an account and letting it grow. But over many years, AIMCO's delivered less than what we pay them for. AIMCO cost us $153 million in Heritage Fund investment expenses over budget last year. We paid them $150 million to deliver less than if it was just stashed in a passive investment account. The government should be focused on getting them back on track. What is the Heritage Fund? It's the money we made in the 70s when oil prices were high. It's the wealth created when my dad would get a phone call in the middle of the night and a rig had gone down. Dad would get into his electrician service truck in -25 and drive out into the muskeg of Northwest Alberta to fix the rig. The company would get the drilling back up and running thanks to my dad. The Lougheed government would get more royalties. A lot of that went into the Heritage Fund. The people of Alberta worked hard for that money. So that's why it's a problem if it's not well managed. And now it's an even bigger problem because the UCP wants to take the CPP money that comes off all our paychecks every month and move it from the big, well-managed cross-Canada pension fund it's in now and hand it over to AIMCO. Why? Because the Premier's more interested in political games with Ottawa than he is in our retirement security. Albertans are worried about this plan to take our CPP and hand it over to AIMCO. They don't trust it. They don't like it. My dad didn't live long enough to collect his CPP, but if he were here, he'd be wondering why it is that if AIMCO can't be trusted with the money he pulled out of the ground in the 1970s, why it is we then hand them all the money that's come off all our paychecks our entire working lives. That's why I'm bringing a private member's bill to give Albertans a real say over the money that belongs to them.
The Honourable Member for Vermilion, Lloydminster Wainwright.
Mr. Speaker, December 3rd is recognized around the world as International Day of Persons with Disabilities. This day is about increasing the awareness and understanding of persons with disabilities in Alberta, while celebrating the contributions they make to our society as a whole. We all benefit from the diverse and inclusive society that supports the choices of Albertans with disabilities. Each and every one of us has a role to play in the success of this province. It is inspiring to see the work being done by our community partners to create a more inclusive and welcoming environment for all. Our communities are stronger when we value each other and recognize the strength that each of us has to offer. Every year, the Premier's Council of the Status of Persons with Disabilities Awards are presented to individuals, groups, and organizations across Alberta to recognize achievements of leaders in the disability community. Congratulations to this year's recipients for their outstanding work in building barrier-free, inclusive communities for everyone. Our government is committed to ensuring people with disabilities live full lives with dignity and equal opportunity, and we enhance diversity in this province. By making our workplaces more inclusive, we can all benefit by providing job opportunities to people who have a lot to contribute if we make an effort to accommodate their unique abilities. This year, more than ever, it is crucial that we make sure vulnerable Albertans have the supports they need during these challenging times. Our government has moved quickly to adjust supports for people with disabilities at the onset of the pandemic, thanks to productive relationships with stakeholders, community groups, and civil society. In fact, we were able to provide $30 million to civil society organizations, charities, not-for-profit organizations, and food banks to support the response to COVID-19. When we help each other, we make Alberta a better place for everyone. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Fort McMurray-Lac-La-Biche has a statement to make.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I'm going to highlight something very special to me, Father Mercady's Santa's Anonymous. Since 1984, the students and staff at Father Patrick Community High School have worked collaboratively to provide Christmas hampers to families in need across the Fort McMurray area. They do so much more than provide a Christmas hamper of food and gifts, but they remind people that they are not alone and that their community is looking out for them. For those who aren't familiar with this magical community service group, Santa's is 100% volunteer-based and provides students with the opportunity to be leaders. Learning about empathy and the value of hard work, students learn how to raise money, organize events, manage time and resources, fill hampers, and execute a complex plan, amongst so many other lessons. Simply put, this program changes lives for the better, and not just for the recipient families. One of my first experiences with public service was volunteering with Santa's Anonymous nearly 20 years ago, which started me down a path that led me to this chamber. I would like to thank Santa's Anonymous and all of the amazing students, staff, and volunteers that make this happen year over year. You do so much to make Christmas magical in our region, and you make me a very, very proud alum. I'm especially thankful that this year they are rising to the challenge of delivering this amazing program in the middle of a global pandemic, as this year's need will truly be greater than many. If you are able to make a donation, large or small, please consider making a donation to this very worthy group. Mr. Speaker, so much of the magic of Christmas is our determination to shine brightly when everything seems darkest. This year has seemed darker than most, but I am heartened to know that Fort McMurray's community spirit and our Trapper pride is shining strong. God bless.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Whitemud has a statement.
Mr. Speaker, last night I held an online consultation on the official opposition's early learning and childcare proposal as part of our Alberta's Future initiative, the first of many on this critical issue. It was everything a consultation should be, and built on the one-on-one conversations that I've been having with stakeholders over the past 18 months. The turnout was amazing, and the conversation was engaging and thoughtful, providing valuable insight into the concerns of childcare providers, educators, parents, and early learning experts. I know the minister has been hearing the same concerns I heard last night, including the impact of this government's actions and lack of focus on quality early learning, fair compensation and support for educators, decreasing options for affordable childcare in Alberta, and barriers to accessing quality childcare. It was this last theme that really drove home for me the importance of government policy that is focused on ensuring equitable access for all to early learning and childcare. We heard from a rural Albertan, a father, who is lamenting the lack of childcare options available to him and his family. He told us to access quality care, he and his family would have to drive more than an hour. He wanted what was best for his children, and he saw the lack of spaces in his community as a barrier to economic opportunities for his family and his neighbours. He highlighted that lack of action in this area will only lead to reduced economic activity for Albertans. Mr. Speaker, as you know, I frequently stood in this House to highlight the economic value of affordable quality childcare. Increasing access leads to economic growth. Decreasing leads to stagnation. The government has tools they can use to address these shortages, tools they are choosing not to use. It isn't only rural Albertans that lack access to childcare where they need it. Communities all over the province are suffering due to the cancellation of the $25 per day pilot program, but the minister isn't listening. I am, and I look forward to the next consultation because I will never stop listening to what Albertans have to say. We are building our early learning and childcare proposal with input from all Albertans, not just a select few. I encourage Albertans to check out albertasfuture.ca and engage with our proposal. I'm listening, and so is the official opposition.
The honourable member for West Yellowhead.
Mr. Speaker, spending an invigorating day or weekend at Marmot Basin is a favourite activity of many Albertans and typically many domestic and international travellers. Marmot Basin's story began in the 1920s when Swiss adventurer Joe Weiss first guided cross-country skiers into Marmot Basin via Whistler's Creek. However, it was not just the Swiss, but also the Scots that had a hand in how Marmot would turn out. The first tow rope was built in 1961 out of spare parts from an old British Army truck by Toby Rayner, who was an early pioneer in Marmot's development. Rayner's tow rope would not have been possible without earlier pioneers, however, such as the British Army's Scottish Lovat Scout Regiment. The Scout Regiment used the Old Forest track for training operations during the Second World War, utilizing snowmobiles and snowcats for transportation into the basin. They were the ones who left behind the truck Rayner salvaged to build his tow rope. After that, Rayner succeeded in getting a license from Parks Canada in 1964, which would mark the official opening of the basin. Now, Marmot Basin is a world-renowned ski resort with 91 named runs that are spread across 4 mountain faces with 3,000 feet of vertical drop. Marmot hosts an average of 2 million people per year. The economic impact and employment opportunities this provides to the town of Jasper, the region, and our province are vital for the continued success of our tourism sector and for the future of the region. Alberta's ski hills provide a GDP contribution of $450 million to our province, and Marmot is a significant portion of that. Marmot Basin officially kicked off its Winter 2020 launch on November 12th and have ensured that following COVID protocols are a top priority. After last year's shortened ski season, they are looking forward to hosting visitors from across the province and showing them all they have to offer. I want to encourage all Albertans to consider making Marmot Basin and Jasper your destination to unwind and make memories this year. The warm hospitality and cool mountain air will make your trip worth the while. Thank you.
Hear, hear. The honourable member for St. Albert.
Build Back Better towards a disability-inclusive, accessible, and sustainable post-COVID world is the week-long theme for this year's International Day of Persons with Disabilities. When we emerge from this pandemic, it's imperative that we use what we've learned to keep moving forward towards inclusion for people with disabilities. Inclusion requires action and investment. It's not enough to say you believe in inclusion. Failure to include disabled Albertans, their allies, and experts at the decision-making table will result in public policy that harms people. Investing in early intervention and family support for young children means children will be prepared to enter inclusive classrooms, but the UCP has cut early intervention funding and slashed funding to school boards. By removing the ban on seclusion rooms in schools, the UCP has turned their back on progress. The UCP is currently undertaking a 1-month review of disability support programs without even involving disabled Albertans, their families, and allies. Investing in inclusive, affordable post-secondary education, apprenticeship, and employment support means disabled Albertans will be able to train and secure jobs that contribute to the economy. The UCP has made deep cuts to post-secondary education and can't even evaluate the minimal disability investment that is being made. Far too many disabled Albertans live in abject poverty, substandard housing, and are forced to rely on the charity of others for survival. This Premier has added to that incredible burden of poverty by cutting benefits disabled Albertans receive, cutting housing subsidies and income support. Measurable goals focused on inclusion are missing from this government's agenda. If the UCP government truly believes in the inclusion of disabled Albertans, it's time for a hard stop on this twisted path of austerity and exclusion. My favorite quote disability self-advocates use is, "Nothing about us without us." On behalf of myself and my colleagues, to all disabled Albertans, we see you, we hear you, and we will continue to fight to ensure that no Albertan is left behind.
The Honourable Member for Red Deer South has a statement.
Mr. Speaker, Albertans want to act, not to be acted upon. As Albertans choose to do small and simple things to reduce COVID, the collective result will be great. The COVID curve bent down without destructive lockdowns. I know Albertans can rise to the challenge. To illustrate this principle, 10 years ago, partnering with the Red Deer Food Bank, my church started an annual food drive in Red Deer. This is how it was done. City streets were divided into routes. Families volunteered for their own route. Teenagers prepared route packages for families. Families dropped off food bags at each home on their route. A couple of days later was the big day. On Saturday, families went to pick up bags of food left on the doorsteps of neighbors choosing to donate. Mr. Speaker, it was a joy to serve with my family. My young children were excited to run to doorsteps, get heavy bags full of food, and bring them back to our minivan. Mr. Speaker, our van got full. We then drove to the church to drop off the bags. Mr. Speaker, when we arrived, large rooms were overflowing with bags full of donated food from generous families of Red Deer South, serving in love. Mr. Speaker, it was inspiring how individuals choosing simply to donate a bag of food taken together collectively resulted in several tons of food for our food bank. Mr. Speaker, the Christmas message is good tidings of great joy, of peace and goodwill towards all. Small and simple individual acts of Albertans can bring collective great results. This is true. Better days are ahead.
The Honourable Member for Peace River.
Today is International Day for Persons with Disabilities. Albertans with disabilities live with unparalleled dignity, and I'm proud of every single one of them. When I was about 6, I was introduced to Peter, who was a few years younger, born with Down syndrome. As we played, there was a lot I envied about him. My God, Mr. Speaker, he was a happy boy. And every Oilers fan knows the sheer ear-to-ear joy that Joey Moss brought to the Oilers team because of his smile. Life expectancy for those with Down syndrome has risen from 10 to about 50 years. Sadly, according to data, countries like Denmark are aborting 98% of children with Down syndrome. In 2019, only 7 Danish children with Down syndrome survived. Numbers in other progressive countries are similarly high. In Iceland, they believe 100% of children with Down syndrome are aborted. In Canada, we don't have reliable data to know how close we are to complete elimination of our children with Down syndrome. Others in the disabled community are systematically targeted. Take the story of Taylor Hyatt from Ottawa, born with cerebral palsy, happily not aborted. But in 2018, she went into the emergency room in her wheelchair with what turned out to be pneumonia. Upon talking to the doctor, Taylor, 27, full of life, in search of emergent care, was offered MAID, our Canadian euphemism for state-sponsored suicide. Mr. Speaker, I wish to share the words of British disability advocate Alison Davis, who died of spina bifida in 2013, natural causes. When my pain is bad, I do not need to be told that I am burdensome. I need to hear that my life has meaning. The feeling that I may be abandoned is worse than any pain, unquote. Instead of abandoning our disabled, today my call is for us to embrace them as a province. I think often of this final quote as I think of our disabled. Society will be judged on the basis of how we treat our weakest members. Among the most vulnerable are surely the unborn and the dying.
Honourable Members, it is 1:50, And that makes it oral question period. And the Leader of Her Majesty's Loyal Opposition has the call.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. This Premier's news that Alberta is preparing to begin vaccine distribution early next year is very encouraging. We know that the federal government can distribute the vaccine between provinces relying on different formulas. For example, the number of seniors in Alberta would mean Alberta would get less. Basing it on population would mean Alberta would get the national average, and basing it on per capita case count would mean Alberta would get a lot more. Can the Premier advise if he knows which of these formulas will govern Alberta's allotment?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm happy to answer that. A lot of this is going to be determined by the federal government. So they have the purchase agreements. They purchase on behalf of the provinces and territories. Right now, their information they've been providing to us is that they would be holding back 20% of the allotments and then distributing the remainder on a per capita basis. They'd then be keeping the 20% for surge capacity if it was ever needed for a province that needed it, as well as for federal undertakings like the military. And if it was needed, I think our Indigenous communities are going to be provided through our provincial allotment, but if there were Indigenous communities, it might be through that 20%.
The Honourable, the Leader of the Opposition.
Well, thank you very much for that information. Now, as the Premier advised yesterday, the Pfizer vaccine must be stored at -80 degrees. But yesterday, he also told us that only 3 of the 13 AHS storage facilities can accommodate those low temperature requirements. At the same time, we're hearing reports that it could be at least 6 months before our orders for additional -80 refrigeration capacity can be filled. So, can the Premier or the Minister tell us if this is accurate, and if so, how the government plans to fully distribute the Pfizer vaccine in Alberta?
The Honourable, the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We've established 20 sites for the Pfizer vaccine, another 13 for the Moderna and other vaccines. We have actually storage capacity for as much as 4.8 million doses at a given time for the ultra-low Pfizer vaccine, so well above what we're going to have at any given time for Pfizer. We've started by getting freezers actually from agriculture and forestry, Mr. Speaker, as well as the other storage freezers that we're procuring. But remembering that the first shipment of doses in January is only going to be about 38,000 per week that we're going to be receiving.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Well, thank you for that information as well. Now, while hearing concrete news about the beginning of vaccine distribution is absolutely encouraging, it does appear as though we will not see meaningful vaccination of Alberta's most vulnerable populations until the end of February at best, and maybe March. So will the Premier or the Health Minister acknowledge that we have between 3 and 4 months until Alberta's most vulnerable citizens are protected? And in so doing, will he finally release detailed modelling, or if he prefers, he can call it forecasting, that will tell us how high our case levels will be between now and then?
Minister of Health.
So, Mr. Speaker, the modelling that we had in the spring is still the modelling that we're using for forecasting. I think the member is talking about the early warning system, the predictive analytics that AHS uses when they see a case count in a given day, and what the acute care capacity might be in between 2 to 14 days after that. And so AHS is going to continue to use those predictive analytics, but when it comes to our case counts, we're still using the modelling that was released in the spring.
Honourable, the Leader of the Opposition.
Well, the circumstances have changed, and 3 months is a long time. Now, our current rate of caseload growth suggests we can't afford to wait. Yesterday, Alberta passed another unique milestone as the first province to call on the federal government and the Red Cross to provide disaster measures in the form of field hospitals. Instead of acting, the Premier is stretching hospitals to the breaking point and beyond, and now he's looking to set up tents. So, Premier, is being the only province planning to treat COVID patients at the rec centre really your idea of responsible planning?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Well, look, Mr. Speaker, I guess it's not a surprise that the NDP would, on one hand, falsely say that we haven't planned, we've prepared for the pandemic, despite a response worth almost $2 billion, Mr. Speaker. And then on the other hand, when they find a small part of the pandemic response, a contingency plan in the pandemic response, fear-mongering and scaring people. This is a small part of a contingency plan. Contingency plans, by definition, are for above and beyond what's currently forecasted in our case numbers, Mr. Speaker. We already have a tent that's already been erected at one of our hospitals in Calgary. We're going to continue to work with AHS and with all partners.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, we don't know what's currently forecast because they won't tell us. If they want to stop the fear-mongering, perhaps you should share information with Albertans. Now, Alberta is the only place that has called on the federal government and the Red Cross to run hospitals. We've also learned that on the same day health officials were touring potential field hospitals and problem-solving on how to staff them, this Premier introduced half measures that didn't even include a province-wide mask mandate, let alone much else. So to the Premier, how in heaven's name can you justify failing to act to stop the spread on the same day your officials were planning for disaster hospitals? And
the Honourable the Minister of Health.
Well, Mr. Speaker, through you to the Honourable Member, thank you to her for admitting that she was fear-mongering. I think that was a big step for the NDP in admitting that. I suppose that they would also fear-monger when we announced that we had 200 ventilators that were donated by Exergy. I suppose they would also fear-monger when we received a donation for a field tent that was erected outside of the Peter Lougheed Hospital. And thank you to Sprung Structures for donating that. Like, these are contingency plans, but not included what's currently or not part of what's currently planned right now, Mr. Speaker. We have an opportunity for making sure there's 2,250 acute care beds to be able to respond to the pandemic this time.
Leader of the Opposition.
Well, Mr. Speaker, these aren't my words. We've hit a crisis. Quote, it's a little bit like somebody driving towards a cliff and instead of applying the brakes, going over and then phoning 911 as they're heading to the bottom. That's an ICU doctor, not me. Quote, the next step is calling in the refrigerator trucks. That's another ICU doctor, not me. Quote, you want to speak about who's in crisis? Have you taken a look at Alberta? That's Ontario's Conservative Health Minister, not me. Premier, the time for waiting is over. When will you act to stop the spread?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, we announced new measures that were in place last week and fully implemented starting this last Monday. We're going to, as we told Albertans, revisit those measures on or before December 15th, and we'll continue to review our measures, our public health measures, every 2 weeks throughout the remainder of the second wave, Mr. Speaker. And going forward, we'll continue to do that review, Mr. Speaker. But look, the NDP are again fear-mongering. We have currently, right now, surge capacity for 2,250 beds, well above of what's expected to be needed throughout the second wave.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Millwoods has the next question.
Mr. Speaker, healthcare workers in Alberta are being worked to exhaustion and beyond because this Premier didn't have the courage to hold back the spread of COVID-19 in our communities. While the Premier was at home for a week and a half, these brave Albertans were working double shifts in danger at patients' bedside. Almost 1,800 health workers have been infected, and now the Premier wants to set up 4 new field hospitals but has no plan to staff them. Premier, why didn't you do your job to slow the spread of COVID-19 in our communities?
Point of order is noted at 1:58. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, quite frankly, none of that is true. We have been planning for this pandemic starting in January. We've been making sure that we've worked with AHS so that they understood that there would be no budget when it comes to the response to the pandemic, and that we've been working closely with them, as well as our continuing care operators, as well as the folks in public health, to be able to make sure that our response to the pandemic is robust. It's a plan that's worth almost $2 billion, Mr. Speaker, including what's spent in AHS to expand workforce capacity, lab testing capacity, as well as making sure that our continuing care operators have the resources they need.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Millwoods.
Healthcare workers are overwhelmed and exhausted already, and this Premier seems to think the healthcare system is only made of beds, buildings, and machines. None of that matters without the hardworking, brave, and professional Albertans who work in our healthcare system. But even while the Premier is asking the federal government to lend him more beds and buildings for a field hospital, he's stripping away health benefits and presumptive coverage for the Albertans who are injured while actually doing the work. Premier, will you finally do the right thing and abandon your cruel plan to strip away benefits from injured hospital workers?
The Honourable the Minister of Jobs, the Economy and Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, let me say first and foremost how much we thank our people that are working on these front lines, Mr. Speaker. Everything that they're doing, Mr. Speaker, right now. And Mr. Speaker, we have the NDP on the other side. They're trying to fear-monger with contingency plans, Mr. Speaker. Contingency plans are the responsible things to do, Mr. Speaker. That's what Albertans expect of us, to plan for contingencies, to plan, Mr. Speaker, to make sure that we're there for every measure. We're bringing in reasonable changes, Mr. Speaker, to bring our labour laws in alignment with the rest of the country, Mr. Speaker. We have to bring balance back to the labour laws in our province.
Honourable the member for Edmonton Millwood.
Workers are putting their lives on the line while this government wants to debate taking their rights away from them and reducing their benefits. These same workers are who are bailing this premier out for not doing his job, and they're the same ones he's planning to fire. 11,000 Albertans who are cleaning rooms, changing sheets, serving food in our hospitals during a deadly pandemic are the very Albertans this premier wants to fire to pay for his $4.7 billion handout to corporations. Premier, before you ask even more of Alberta's healthcare heroes to put themselves at risk, will you promise you won't fire them when the crisis has ended?
The Minister of Health.
None of that is true, and I thank, as my colleague said, we thank the healthcare workers. We know that they're stressed, especially those in the ICUs, especially those in our 16 largest hospitals, in those acute care wards, Mr. Speaker. We know that they're working hard. We know that they're stressed. We thank them for their hard work, Mr. Speaker. But look, the NDP are now attacking again the implementation plan of a performance review that would be implemented many years from now, from a review of AHS, which was complimented and lauded by their own health critic back earlier this year, Mr. Speaker.
Order. The honourable member for Edmonton City Centre is the only one with the call.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Alberta doctors know this premier is hiding key information about the COVID-19 pandemic from Albertans. So they formed their own committee to help inform the public, chaired by Dr. Noel Gibney, Professor Emeritus of the U of A, and Dr. James Talbot, former Chief Medical Officer of Health in Alberta. Now, earlier this week, these doctors said, and I quote, "The recent public health measures implemented by the province have not significantly slowed the rate of COVID-19 infections, which have progressively increased. The statement is supported by the sky-high daily case numbers. Why is the Premier not listening and taking action?"
The Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, it's not true. We are listening. And look, there's lagging indicators, and we're going to continue to see cases increase for at least 10 days after a health measure is implemented. And we're going to then, and for another 2 weeks after that, continue to see acute care capacity be affected after a health measure is implemented. But as we told Albertans, we would review those health measures on or before December 15th. We're going to continue to review them on a 2-week basis.
Order. The honourable member for Edmonton City Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. These doctors say, and I quote, "It is vital that additional effective public health measures are put in place by the government immediately to decrease the rate of new COVID-19 infections and to take the current unsustainable pressures off of the hospitals, ICUs, and healthcare professionals." This is professional public health advice, and the Premier can't silence it in the Cabinet room this time. Will the Premier listen to Dr. Talbot and Dr. Gibney and take action to protect families and businesses, like introducing a provincial mask policy, a simple step that encroaches on absolutely no one's rights?
Point of order is noted at 2:03. The Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, as I said, we would, after a public health measure is implemented, continue to see cases rise until we can see the effects 10 to 14 days after that health measure is implemented. So we are waiting for that data. We will see that after this week, and I think, Mr. Speaker, and we're going to review the data with our public health officials. And as we told Albertans, we would review those public health measures on or before December 15th.
Point of order.
Point of order is noted at 2:04. The Honourable, the member for Edmonton City Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. These are experienced doctors, Mr. Speaker, and they are noting that Alberta's hospitals are under unprecedented severe pressure, the minister's thanks or not. It's clear to all Albertans that this is because this Premier lacked the backbone to stand up to the extremist fringe in his own caucus. And that's why he hasn't taken even the easy, simple steps like a provincial mask policy. Now, these doctors say that a surge scenario with makeshift ICUs and repurposed staff, in fact, may threaten survival rates of Albertans with severe cases of COVID. So why did the Premier refuse to slow this spread in the committee and let this tsunami hit our hospital?
The Honourable, the Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, Speaker, when most of the rest of the world was actually advocating against people wearing masks because it would have people touching their faces too often, we were, quite frankly, one of the first jurisdictions to encourage the use of masks, to the extent that we actually distributed 40 million throughout the province, Mr. Speaker. We encouraged the use of masks earlier than everyone else. We actually do have a mandatory mask to the province starting in continuing care, and now last week we implemented further measures for masking in all indoor workplaces, and we're going to continue to review those health measures and the effects they have on our case counts in the days ahead.
Order. The government House Leader and the official opposition leader will come to order. The honourable member for Calgary Currie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, the Premier announced that Alberta has a team in place and a plan that's ready to distribute COVID-19 vaccines as soon as our province receives them. This is great news, as widespread vaccination is one of the best ways to protect both lives and livelihoods while getting things back to normal. Can the Minister of Health tell this House when Alberta can expect our first shipment of the vaccine?
Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
A point of order is noted at 2:06. The Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member for the question. So this is all relying on information that we get from the federal government and the indications they give us on when the first vaccine candidates may get approval. So right now we're expecting to get those first shipments from, we think it's going to be the Pfizer candidate, which is going to get approval first. That would be coming, we expect, from the information we get from the feds on January 4th. And the first batches, I think, would be around about 38,000 every week and thereafter from the Pfizer manufacturer.
The honourable member for Calgary Currie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given that yesterday the Premier announced that our most vulnerable would be the first to receive the COVID-19 vaccine, and given that protecting our most vulnerable has always been a priority of Alberta's government during this fight against COVID-19, can the Minister of Health please tell this chamber how many Albertans does the government expect to vaccinate in phase 1 of the vaccine rollout, and who will be the first to get it?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. And again, this is going to depend on not just when the Pfizer candidate gets approval, but when the other candidates get approved too. Phase 1 is expected to be from January 4th to perhaps the end of March 31st. So throughout that 3-month period, it depends on whether it's just the Pfizer vaccine or whether there are could be other approvals, but perhaps around 400,000 Albertans might get the vaccine, knowing as well that as we get the vaccines from those manufacturers, there's going to be 2 doses that are going to be needed for it to be effective, and so we expect maybe perhaps around 400,000 Albertans.
The honourable member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Minister for that information. Given how important it will be for the vaccine to be distributed quickly and safely, and the massive planning and logistical challenges in getting the vaccine to all parts of the province as they arrive from the federal government, can the Minister of Health please tell this House about who has been chosen to lead this massive effort? Thank you.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the answer is it's General Winnick, who is the Deputy Minister of Municipal Affairs. He's been chosen, as we announced yesterday. He'll be working with AHS and the Ministry of Health to overlook and help with the distribution and the storage plan that we've started to as I mentioned, to the Honourable Member from Edmonton Strathcona, and we'll be working with General Winnick in the days ahead.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Glenora has a question.
Mr. Speaker, the UCP continues to withhold valuable information about the greatest public health emergency we have faced in our lives. The R-value of COVID-19 is critical to determining whether we've had any success slowing the spread or not. The government said they would make the R-value public on Monday. Today is Thursday. It's been published that in the media that now the government has decided that they will keep all of this data secret. To the Minister, why would you hide this information that would help people make responsible choices and could save lives?
Order. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, that's not true. And Premier took this question at his press conference yesterday, and he announced that that was going to be reviewed at the next Cabinet COVID Committee. And look, I think as we announce or we release our statistics on a daily basis, we continue to provide Dr. Hinshaw on a 3 times weekly basis, Mr. Speaker, and as we continue to provide, I think, one of the most transparent reporting systems on COVID statistics throughout the country, we're going to continue to make sure that Albertans have all the information they have before them so they understand the facts.
The Honourable, the member for Edmonton Glenora.
Given that the Premier has said that the province's R value must dip below 1 for the measures he's imposed to be lifted on December 15th, and given that since we released AHS modelling data, Albertans know that the R value is constantly being updated by public health experts. So to the Minister, are you hiding the data from Albertans because you don't want them to see how terribly your plan is, or will you share all of that data with them today?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, again, as I said to the member for Edmonton Strathcona, this is the NDP playing semantics. It is not modelling, Mr. Speaker. It is the early warning system of AHS and the predictive analytics that they use when they see a case count in a given day and what the pressure would be on the acute care system. It's fantastic work. I thank them for doing that work so they can continue to respond in a dynamic way throughout the pandemic, Mr. Speaker. The NDP continue to play games with words and play semantics, Mr. Speaker, because their one goal throughout this pandemic is to fearmonger, Mr. Speaker.
Well, member for Edmonton Glenora.
Given that we also published graphs this week showing more than 4,000 COVID-19 cases were not properly contact traced the week of November 8th, and then another 6,000 the week of November 15th. And given that the Premier failed to hire contract tracers for months as a second wave of COVID-19 crashed into Alberta, and given that contract tracing has completely collapsed in this province under the Minister's leadership, to the Minister, did you intentionally understaff contract tracing because you didn't want the truth to come out to Albertans?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
That is completely false, Mr. Speaker. We started off before the pandemic with 50 contact tracers throughout the system, and we've built up the contact tracing workforce to over 800 now, and we're planning on getting to 1,600 very soon, Mr. Speaker. And that's because we have told AHS resources are not an issue. We encourage them to continue to hire, not just in contact tracing, though, Mr. Speaker, but also in our labs, the assessment centres, and our workforce capacity in the labs, as well as through acute care in our ICUs, Mr. Speaker, because resources are an issue, and we'll continue to work with AHS to respond to the pandemic.
Order. The Honourable Member for Calgary-McCall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I watched a disturbing video. The Calgary police, fulfilling the law, delivered fine to the organizers of anti-mask protests that this Premier has refused to condemn or even criticize. The organizers berated the officers, compared them to Nazis, and informed them that the Premier has given them permission for their dangerous anti-mask rally. Will the Premier at long last condemn this event and the extremists who put the health of Albertans, all Albertans, at risk?
The Honourable the Minister of Justice and Solicitor General.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I can confirm that the instruction that this government gave with respect to mass protests is that we expect that the public health measure that has been put in place by our Chief Medical Officer of Health and by this government be complied with. I know that the member opposite would like to play politics with that. As Minister of Justice, I have communicated to the public and to law enforcement that it is my expectation that those public health measures would have to be complied with.
The Honourable Member for Calgary-McCall.
Given that the organizers then described COVID-19, which has tragically taken the lives of over 500 Albertans, and I quote, this so-called pandemic, given that this pandemic is real, will the Premier finally give a clear and equivocal condemnation of these organizers who are putting lives at risk, or does he actually support them spreading dangerous misinformation like he does with the anti-maskers in his own caucus?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, as I've said recently, when I was interviewed for Red FM, I condemned those who flagrantly disregard our public health measures, and I do so again here in this House, Mr. Speaker, as well those Albertans who are misinformed and believe that COVID is not real or are denying the fact that we are in the middle of a pandemic. We are. And all Albertans have to take it seriously. They have to take the public measures seriously. Then they have to do it not just to protect themselves, not to protect their families, but to protect our healthcare workers, to protect those who are most vulnerable, because all it takes is one spin class, quite frankly, Mr. Speaker, to seed an outbreak in a continuing care facility.
The Honourable Member.
given that the Minister of Transportation has said in the past he considers the organizer of this rally a friend, and I quote, a fearless man. And given that while the Premier has found time to blame my constituents, he has refused to call out his allies for spreading misinformation, like the organizers of this rally or the UCP MLA who said that the masks spread COVID. Why won't Premier finally do the right thing and tell his extremist friends to stop spreading misinformation and COVID-19?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
I did in the previous answer, Mr. Speaker. I'll do so again. I ask all Albertans to please take COVID seriously. Understand we are in the middle of a pandemic. Please to follow the public health measures to protect themselves, to protect their loved ones, their community, our healthcare workers, and those who are throughout the province who are most vulnerable to severe outcomes.
The Honourable Member for Calgary North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Alberta's recovery plan is focused on building, diversifying, and creating jobs. Our government believes in supporting young Albertans in their educational endeavours to expand their skill set, which includes new schools in our growing communities. I am glad that much awaited North Calgary High School has been approved in 2019-2020 budget to the Minister of Infrastructure. When can the growing communities of North Calgary expect the construction of the high school to commence?
The Honourable Minister of Finance and the President of Treasury Board.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and to the member for the question. On behalf of the Minister of Infrastructure, I'm happy to report that the bids for the contractor will close on December 4th, 2020, with the contract to be awarded on December 14th, 2020. Construction is expected to start shortly thereafter. Thank you.
Member for Calgary North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Minister. Given that the students are future job creators and contribute to the social and economic fabric of our province, and further given that a high school serving my riding will mean students spend less time commuting and more on educational activities. To the Minister of Infrastructure, when can parents expect to send their children to this high school?
The Honourable Minister of Finance, President of Treasury Board.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and again to the member for the question. Mr. Speaker, once construction is completed in the summer of 2023 on the North Calgary High School, it will be up to the Calgary Board of Education to determine the exact opening date. There are 15 school projects completed or underway since our government took office in Calgary and Airdrie alone at a value of $369 million. Those projects have created over 2,000 good jobs.
The Honourable Member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Minister. Given that Alberta's recovery plan is creating jobs through various infrastructure projects, and further given that the creation of jobs is our top priority, the construction of North High School will lead to further investment into the economy. To the Minister of Infrastructure, how many jobs will be created through the construction of not only this high school, but similar projects across the province?
The Honourable Minister of Finance, President of Treasury Board.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and again to the member for the questions. We estimate over 380 jobs will be created building the North Calgary High School, and across the province there are 62 school projects valued at $1.7 billion underway, creating thousands of good jobs. We're building new schools and updating old schools because this government knows the crucial role these institutions play in building the province that we love.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Buffalo.
The COVID-19 pandemic has been an extremely difficult time for small businesses across this province and in my constituency of Calgary-Buffalo. It's led to an economic crisis in our province that's seen thousands of Albertans lose their jobs as businesses have shut their doors, many unfortunately forever. As we face an even bigger second wave, the UCP has been missing in action. When will this government finally step up and provide real support for small businesses to keep their doors open and protect jobs?
The Honourable Minister of Jobs, the Economy and Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, I don't think the NDP staffer who wrote the man's notes got an update from last week when we encouraged him to update their notes again. Mr. Speaker, we brought in a second tranche on a relaunch grant, Mr. Speaker. We put $200 million there for small businesses. We deferred things, Mr. Speaker. We deferred payments, Mr. Speaker. We've worked closely with the federal government, Mr. Speaker, on rent relief. And Mr. Speaker, we also need to celebrate the successes right across the river from that person's constituency, Mr. Speaker. There's Benevity worth $1 billion now on evaluation, Mr. Speaker. Lots of encouraging things happening with our small businesses that are now growing as well.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Buffalo.
given that many of the support programs for small businesses have expired and it took the UCP 11 days to offer any kind of support to businesses in this second wave, and given these supports won't actually be accessible for several more weeks, even though small businesses in Calgary need that help now, and given that the support the UCP announced was a proposal our caucus put forward as a part of a 7-point plan for small businesses, will the government adopt our other 6 recommendations to help small businesses weather the second wave of COVID that could be implemented and protect jobs today, not weeks from now?
The Honourable, the Minister of Jobs, the Economy and Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, hopefully this person puts down their notes for the third question, Mr. Speaker. The member of the NDP staff, please get him an updated note for his next round because he obviously needs to read it, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when it comes to this, we have taken action. $200 million available for small businesses. 17,000 small businesses, Mr. Speaker, have participated in this program. We've done a second tranche now because of new health measures, Mr. Speaker. We're going to continue to be there for small businesses in Alberta, Mr. Speaker, whereas the people on the other side, they want to shut them down, Mr. Speaker. They want to put over 100,000 people out of work. Their measures are irresponsible.
Member for Calgary-Buffalo.
Thank you. Given that I'm hearing from small businesses in Calgary that the new measures are confusing due to the breakdown of contact tracing in this province, forcing some businesses to close their doors, and given that controlling the spread of COVID-19 is the most effective tool we have in protecting small businesses and jobs, and given that the most effective way to control the spread of the virus is through testing and effective contact tracing, will the government finally fix their broken contact tracing system so we can implement more targeted and less confusing measures that will protect both Albertans' health and the economy?
The Honourable Minister of Jobs, the Economy and Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, the NDP staff are number 5. Mr. Speaker, hopefully they can update their notes for that member so he doesn't have to keep reading them, Mr. Speaker, and gets updated notes on the other side. Mr. Speaker, we're going to continue to work with small businesses. And let's first and foremost, let's thank all of those small businesses that have done everything humanly possible to keep themselves open, to keep people employed, Mr. Speaker, to keep providing services across this province, Mr. Speaker. We don't want to shut them down. The people on the other side want to have a mass shutdown, Mr. Speaker. We're following the science. We're following the data, taking reasonable steps to keep them open, Mr. Speaker. Thank you so much to our small business owners across Alberta for everything that they do.
The Honourable Member for Lethbridge West.
Mr. Speaker, Albertans do not trust the UCP with our retirement security. The government wants to take Albertans' CPP savings, the money that comes off our paychecks, our entire working lives, and hand it over to AIMCO, some folks that haven't been able to demonstrate proper stewardship of our heritage fund. Albertans are worried about handing over our CPP savings. So will the Minister of Finance agree that Albertans deserve a say over whether it is in fact AIMCO, folks that lost a cool $2 billion earlier this year through negligence, that gets to manage our retirement money?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the Premier's been clear all along. In the event we believe there's a business case for an Alberta pension plan, we would take that to Albertans in the form of a referendum. So the answer is yes to the member from Lethbridge West. Mr. Speaker, and in fact, I believe that there will be great potential for an Alberta pension plan. Actuaries have shown that there could be close to $3 billion of savings, both shared by Alberta employees and Alberta employers. The members opposite would have us not even look into the issue. And Mr. Speaker, we will look into the issue to position this province to be most competitive.
The Honourable Member for Lethbridge West.
Given that AIMCO has not lived up to its own investment goals, they gave us negative value add, but we paid them just last year $150 million to manage the Heritage Fund. How can the Minister of Finance justify withholding information about AIMCO's Heritage Fund management, breaking the Heritage Trust Fund Act to paper over AIMCO's losses over the summer, and then ask Albertans to hand these guys our CPP retirement savings to manage?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I categorically reject the assertions in the member's question. The reality is AIMCO's provided great returns for Albertans over the years. They have an excellent track record. This last year was a challenging year in markets. It was a challenging year for every sovereign wealth fund in the world, and AIMCO's board has conducted a review of its investment policies and strategies and is making adjustments. Mr. Speaker, I'm confident that AIMCO will continue to serve Albertans well into the future.
The Honourable Member.
Well, given the minister sounds more worried about protecting the guys in suits at AIMCO rather than the folks in coveralls who built the Heritage Fund, given that investment management's complicated, but what's not hard to understand is the 36,000 Albertans who wrote letters to the Premier asking him to keep his mitts off their retirement. Yeah. Will the government commit to at least conducting a referendum over whether AIMCO is handed our CPP savings to manage? Or should we just trust these unaccountable suits with our money, even though they've not proven they can manage a two-car parade?
The Honourable Minister.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. One thing we will commit to is to take the question of whether we should proceed with an Alberta pension plan to Albertans. We made that commitment. We will follow through with that commitment should there be a business case. But, Mr. Speaker, again, I want to point out the members opposite would not even have us look into this great proposition that could provide Alberta employers and Alberta employees great financial advantage. Mr. Speaker, we've sent close to net $3 billion to Ottawa for years through the Canada Pension Plan. This warrants a review.
Good job. Order. The Honourable Member for Central Peace Notley is the only one with the call.
Mr. Speaker, at this time of the year, with roads getting worse in winter weather, I'm reminded of one of the hidden costs of health care in this province, the cost to Albertans forced to travel for services out of town. We understand that not every service can be made available to rural and remote locations. However, right now the community of Fairview sees a need for a CT scanner to serve not only Fairview, but the remote communities up to 150 kilometres away, and the community is willing to raise money for this purchase. Will the Health Minister commit to supporting this service in Fairview?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member for often meeting with me on this issue and introducing me to many of his constituents, including the municipalities in and around Fairview. So I can say that the community of Fairview has never had a CT scanner, only an X-ray unit. There are 2 CT units that are within about 100 kilometres in Peace River and in Grand Prairie. Both of them have the capacity and the infrastructure, quite frankly, to do more scans. Fairview Health has identified other priorities for potential foundation support, including possible renovations to...
The Honourable Member for Central Peace.
Given the importance of diagnostic services and procedures, and given that towns like Fairview have seen such services centralized to larger locations over the years, out of their facilities and hundreds of kilometres away, and in light of the fact that the endoscopy was previously offered in Fairview, and after working with AHS, they are now positioned to offer it again, will the Minister work with the local health administration to restore this service in Fairview?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And yes, the program, endoscopy program at the Fairview Health Complex was temporarily stopped in January of 2019. And the patients at Fairview are requiring endoscope procedures continue to be referred to Grand Prairie and to Peace River programs. Now, the program at Fairview is currently under review to ensure patient safety and infection control standards are met. And our government, the Alberta's government, is committed to improving access to care and services to all Albertans wherever they live. And so this is under review, Mr. Speaker, and it is something we hope to be able to provide an answer for soon in the future.
The Honourable Member.
Given that there is a tremendous amount of underutilized or completely unused health infrastructure across rural Alberta, including operating rooms in Fairview, and given that Albertans are often forced to travel great distances for surgical procedures while recovering away from home, has the Minister considered allowing surgeons from out of town to book surgical time and perform routine procedures out of the Fairview Hospital?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as the member knows, the Fairview Hospital operating room has been closed for several years now, and there are significant upgrades and staff training that would be required to meet the current surgical standards. Now, remembering that we had announced in Budget 2020 significant amounts of investment in our AHS facilities, including $35 million for the Rural Health Facilities Revitalization Program to improve services and facilities so that we can address accreditation issues. This might be something that is considered in the future for Fairview at this time, and we're looking forward to getting that information.
The Honourable Member for Gold Bar.
The UCP clearly revealed in writing their strategy for parks before the 2020 budget, stating their plan to find alternative management approaches for 164 sites they claim to be underutilized would include sales and transfers. This morning it was reported that 11 of the sites planned to be delisted from the park system are used just as much as other parks and in fact are becoming more popular each year. To the Minister, Rather than redirecting blame or trying to spin your way out of this mess, will you just admit that your plan to sell parks was wrong and commit to stopping it now?
Yeah.
The Honourable, the Minister of Jobs, the Economy and Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, we have said this many times in this legislature that our parks will go on, Mr. Speaker, and I want to make sure to that member, I'm going to give that member on the other side an opportunity to deviate from their notes and apologize to this House, Mr. Speaker, for misleading Albertans, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to parks. Mr. Speaker, time and time again, the members opposite have made misleading statements, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to parks. Mr. Speaker, please deviate from those NDP talking notes that he has in front of him and apologize once and for all.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Gold Bar.
Given the minister seems to want me to apologize for his own press releases, given the UCP also blocked reporters and Albertans from accessing data on parks usage because the data clearly shows that the government is lying about only selling very small and underutilized provincial recreation areas, and given that this data is tracked by the department officials, but the only way that Albertans can currently access it is by submitting Freedom of Information requests to the minister. I can see why you don't want Albertans to have this information, but they still deserve to be able to see it. Will you commit today to immediately releasing all of the usage data for the 164 parks that you plan to sell?
The Honourable Minister of Jobs, the Economy and Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, I think this might be the first time we've seen here today where a member opposite actually deviated slightly from their notes, so I want to say job well done to the member opposite for that slight deviation from the notes. Here. But Mr. Speaker, again, we're tired of the misinformation, Mr. Speaker. Our parks will go on. Albertans can continue to use them this winter, Mr. Speaker. We're proud of the work that our Minister of Environment is doing to make sure we have sustainable parks going forward, Mr. Speaker. We love the outdoors here, Mr. Speaker. The vast majority of the MLAs representing the outdoors and our parks, Mr. Speaker, are on this side, Mr. Speaker. And we love these parks, Mr. Speaker. We're going to continue to make sure they're there for generations to come.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Gold Bar.
Given the minister just lambasted me for not deviating from my notes and then failed to deviate from his own notes and address the question that I asked about data, given that many areas of the province are quickly becoming blanketed in a sea of green lawn signs demanding that Albertans defend their parks, and given that I haven't seen anyone in support of the parks plan except those who are on the UCP payroll, to the minister, will you just stop listening to your ego, start listening to Albertans, and reverse your decision to sell and close our parks?
Mr. Speaker, quick thing here, Mr. Speaker. There are no notes here, Mr. Speaker. I'm not the Minister of Environment, but Mr. Speaker, I'll gladly answer this question time and time again, Mr. Speaker. We're not going to fall to the clickbait of the opposition, Mr. Speaker, because that is what this is. It is clickbait. That is literally what they're doing, Mr. Speaker, trying to get people to click on buttons and donate to build up a list, Mr. Speaker, for the next election. That is what this is about, Mr. Speaker. Clickbait, false information. Shame on the NDP. I don't know how they can stand up in this House day in and day out with this misinformation, Mr. Speaker. Our parks will go on.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton White Mud.
Well, Mr. Speaker, for months the opposition, parents, childcare operators and stakeholders have been raising concerns that the changes that the UCP have made to childcare will have negative impacts. The minister has brushed this off, calling it fear-mongering and claiming she's supposedly helping those, quote, most in need. Not so for a childcare centre in Calgary Cross that has been operating for over 30 years serving low-income Calgarians and will now be closing their doors due to funding cuts by this government. To the minister, how does reducing low-cost childcare options in Calgary help those most in need?
The Honourable Minister of Children's Services.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I do want to thank the member opposite for her interest. I understand she held a town hall consultation last night where she spent over half of the time sharing her opinions as opposed to listening to those of Albertans. You want to talk about, childcare centres closing in Alberta, Mr. Speaker? I do believe last night her first answer was about an ELCC centre in Manning that was at risk because of the ELCC program ending. What she failed to mention was 8 licensed operators closed when they put their centre in that community, Mr. Speaker. Stick to the facts.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton White Mud, order.
Well, given, Mr. Speaker, that this is about Alberta families, not about me, but the minister can't seem to remember that, given that the Devar Child Care Centre in Calgary was part of the $25 per day pilot program, and given that 98% of the families they serve are fully subsidized, meaning that under the pilot program they paid $0 per day, and given that the families in this centre are mostly refugees and new Canadians speaking 18 different languages, and given that with the end of the $25 per day program, these families can't afford childcare anywhere else. To the same minister, what are you doing to ensure that the families this centre serves will have access to ongoing quality childcare that meets their needs and those of their children? And they're listening, Minister.
The Honourable, the Minister of Children's Services.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Speaker. And I think a lot of times when we talk about things like $25 a day daycare, what we fail to address is sometimes the other very important pieces, which are in fact quality and inclusion. And so I do want to speak to the fact that financially vulnerable families absolutely have access to subsidy, but these centres also had access to transitional grants for those centres that do serve a higher proportion of vulnerable families in their communities. And part of our work on inclusive childcare will also provide outreach and cultural
Honourable
support.
Member Fredericton-Whitemud has the call.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given that this daycare was partnered with Hull Child and Family Services and that the cuts and changes by this government to family support services is the reason that Hull is no longer able to keep the building, and given that even if this centre could find a new space, the families they serve cannot afford to pay the difference, but the $400 per month difference between full subsidy and the average cost of childcare in Calgary, and given these families will either stop working or return to informal, unlicensed childcare, to the same minister, will you admit that your government's policies are not helping those most in need, but are actually forcing these families out of childcare and out of the workforce?
The Honourable, the Minister of Children's Services.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Once again, for all of those ELCC centres who are transitioning out of those programs who do serve vulnerable populations, they did in fact receive additional funds. So what's being put forward by the member opposite is somewhat concerning, because they did receive additional funds to continue offering childcare for those families. We will absolutely look into that. But once again, Mr. Speaker, we did provide that funding for those transitional supports.
Basca Barhead Westlock has a question.
Mr. Speaker, impaired driving is a very serious crime, and the penalties for it must reflect that fact. Beginning December 1st, police are now able to hand out roadside impaired driving penalties. This includes fines of up to $2,000 and vehicle seizure for up to 30 days. The government also introduced an administrative branch called Safe Roads Alberta to deal with impaired driving offenders. To the Minister of Justice and Solicitor General, under the new process, will first-time impaired drivers be treated any differently than repeat offenders of impaired driving?
Honourable, the Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member for that important question. The Safe Roads program does indeed differentiate between first-time and repeat offenders. A first-time offender may only receive administrative penalties and not criminal charges. But repeat offenders, Mr. Speaker, can expect both administrative penalties and criminal charges. And let me be clear, Mr. Speaker, a first-time offense is not a get-out-of-jail-free card. Anyone causing bodily harm or death will be criminally charged in addition to administrative penalties.
Honourable the member for Athabasca Barhead Westlock.
Mr. Speaker, given that many courts in our province were overbooked or backlogged even before the COVID-19 pandemic, and given that prior to this recent change, most impaired driving offences were brought through the court system for penalties to be handed out, to the same minister, will this new process help to alleviate pressure on the court system while still maintaining fair and just decisions on penalties for offenders?
Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, moving impaired driving offences to Safe Roads program will remove a tenth of all criminal files from our court system. In 2021 alone, we are estimating 2 million traffic tickets will be routed through this program. The new system is online, uses plain language, and does not require a lawyer to navigate. Written decisions are issued in plain language. Albertans would not need a law degree to understand these decisions. That is the first part to ensuring a fair, unbiased decision. The second is the right to judicial review, Mr. Speaker. Any Albertan who disagrees with the decision can seek judicial review.
The Honourable Member
Mr. Speaker, given that prior to December 1st there were impaired driving offences being handled through the previous process, and given that the new process enables stronger penalties that can be properly handled outside of the court system, to the same minister, how will impaired driving offences committed before December 1st be dealt with, and will they be subject to the stronger penalties that were recently introduced?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and to the member for that question. Offences committed prior to December 1 will continue to route through the current traffic court system. More importantly, Mr. Speaker, BC has experienced a significant drop in impaired driving offences, including seeing the rate of impaired driving incidents drop by 36% in 2011 to 2018, and the number of impaired driving fatalities fall by 54% from 2010 to 2018. Alberta's government is confident that this common sense approach will keep Albertans safe and reduce the burden on an already strained justice system.
The Honourable Member for Leicester-Slave Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In my constituency, due to its size and geographical location, it's been difficult at times for Northern First Nations to have equitable access to health care for much-needed surgeries. Communities in the north struggle to access the same level of service as individuals in Alberta's big cities. To the Minister of Health, what is being done to reduce wait times for adequate health care in communities such as Big Stone Cree Nation?
The Honourable, the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On October 28th of this year, AHS began operating the Alberta Indigenous Virtual Care Clinic, and it offers patients who are First Nations, Métis, and Inuit access to same-day primary care services through a secured telephone or video system. Now, this improves access and removes barriers to primary care both in rural areas and for underserved urban Indigenous populations. It staffs about 16 Indigenous physicians committed to practices of cultural safety and humility. The clinic complements the existing healthcare services that are provided to those Indigenous.
The Honourable Member for Leicester-Slave Lake.
Thank you, Minister. Given that approximately 43 charter surgical facilities exist under contract with Alberta Health Services to perform low-risk surgeries for Albertans, and given that the official opposition loves to spread misinformation about charter surgical facilities, to the same minister, how can First Nation communities attract charter surgical facilities to their local areas?
Well, the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and we're eager to work with all partners to bring down surgical wait times. With a $50,000 grant of support, First Nations communities will be able to hire consultants to identify health needs specific to their community. Due to the pandemic right now, AHS has delayed posting the RFP until 2021, and we look forward to seeing the results of First Nations needs assessments to determine which communities can help us to reduce our wait times and improve surgical care throughout innovative work.
The Honourable Member.
Minister, for that answer. Given the Minister recently awarded grants to 6 First Nation communities, Enoch, Musqueam, Tsuut'ina, Big Stone, Siksika, and Blood Tribe, Kainai, and given that there are more First Nation communities that experience long wait times when accessing health care, to the same minister, will there be an opportunity for other First Nation communities to get involved in a similar grant program as it relates to accessing quality health care?
The Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And so First Nations who did not receive a grant but wish to still participate in the Alberta Surgical Initiative may still apply to the RFP. The First Nation community must also engage a medical director who would work at the chartered surgical facility and be accountable for the facility's quality and safety and its services. Alberta's government and AHS are developing initiatives to improve surgical services and reduce the occurrence of short notice schedule changes. Any First Nation that owns or operates a medical facility within the public health care system may be involved in one or many aspects of the Alberta Surgical Initiative.
Honourable members, that concludes the time allotted for oral question period today, a question period in which Oscars could have been given out to either side of the House for their performances. Very, very exceptional. Prior to heading out this afternoon, I know some of you may be needing to head down the road. As all of you know, your constituency assistants have an employer relationship with the Speaker's office, of which I am immensely grateful. And so I have left a very, very small token of my appreciation for each of your constituency assistants. They are located in the government lounge as well as the opposition lounge. If you could do me a large favor by taking them back to your constituency offices for me, that would be greatly appreciated. For anyone that is unable to do that, it will be much sweeter. It will be sent to your member office here in Edmonton for which you to take next week. Honourable members, in 30 seconds or less, we will proceed to the remainder of the routine. The Honourable, the member for Banff-Kananaskis, has a statement to make.
Ronald Reagan famously said, "Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We don't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. It must be fought for, protected, and handed on." Mr. Speaker, this year has brought events that no one could have fathomed. We've had serious conversations about legislation's ability to force treatment and examinations. People are demanding vaccines be made mandatory, and some are even calling for a total lockdown enforced by a police state. Many of the freedoms that have made me so proud to be Canadian and Albertan are seemingly being reduced to a memory lingering in the back of my mind. Mr. Speaker, I long for the days where we could left our houses without fear, where we could share food and laughter and community with one another, where we could embrace without fear of judgment and discuss our differences over drinks rather than on social media. At some point, we must decide where we go from here, and we need to return to the very ideals that built this province and our people: self-determination and the ability to think critically. They say it takes just 3 weeks for a habit to be formed, and we are now 9 months into COVID behavior. So to quote a constituent of mine, people have been conditioned to view freedom as selfishness. Mr. Speaker, we need to fight for a better tomorrow. People can't live in fear, isolation, and dependence on the government forever. They'll become trapped alone with their own thoughts. Domestic violence rates will rise as tensions increase. Clinical depression will become widespread, and our kids will never make the memories that we did growing up. We can't let COVID do that to us. We can bring our old normal back, but we have to fight for it. So please, follow public health guidelines, temporarily social distance, be kind to your neighbour, and pray for those in need. Because we can all do our part to bend this curve and head into 2021 with a renewed sense of hope for our future. Together, we can ensure that our best days are yet to come.
Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Presenting petitions, notices of motions, introduction of bills.
The member for Lethbridge West.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I rise deal with this to introduce Bill 208, the Alberta Investment Management Corporation Amendment Act 2020, Mr. Speaker. The Act proposes to add public sector members to the AIMCO board, requires a referendum if Alberta sends notice to withdraw, and removes the ability of Treasury Board, if Alberta sends a notice to withdraw from the CPP, and requires a referendum that AIMCO be the manager. It also removes the ability of Treasury Board to give directives to AIMCO. And so with that, I would like to introduce the bill.
Honourable members, having heard the member for Lethbridge West has moved first reading of Bill 208, Alberta Investment Management Corporation Amendment Act 2020. Does the Assembly agree to the motion for first reading? All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. In my opinion, the ayes have it. That motion is carried and so ordered.
Bill 208, Alberta Investment Management Corporation Amendment Act 2020 is now read a first time. Tabling, returns and reports.
The Honourable Member for Lethbridge West, followed by the Member for Edmonton Millwoods.
Actually, no tablings today, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Calgary McCall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to table 2 sets of reports. I have requisite number of the copies on behalf of my colleague from Edmonton Millwoods, and they both relate to PTSD at workplaces. One is a CBC article, other one is a university research paper. So I have the requisite number of copies.
Are there other tablings? Seeing none.
Tablings to the clerk, deferred divisions.
Honourable members, we had a very exciting question period where there was a number of points of order. The first point of order was called at 1:58, I believe, by the Honourable the Government House Leader, and I believe that the Deputy Government House Leader will be arguing on his behalf.
Speaker, there was a reference by the member opposite to the Premier was at home for a week and a half, Mr. Speaker. And as you know, it's well established, allusions to the presence or absence of a member or minister in the chamber are unacceptable. Mr. Speaker, I think that this one is pretty cut and dry. I don't think much more has to be said than that with respect to the comment that was made. Again, it seems there's clear precedent on this one, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Opposition Deputy House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The context for that comment was my colleague from Edmonton, Millwoods. She said that healthcare workers in Alberta are being worked to exhaustion and beyond because this Premier didn't have the courage to hold back the spread of COVID-19 in our communities. While the Premier was home for a week and a half, these brave Albertans were working. I do not believe that member intended to refer the absence or presence from the legislature. She was just broadly speaking about the conditions in our hospitals and how these people are working and Premier was home. So I don't think it's a point of order.
I am prepared to rule on this. I've interjected on this particular situation on a couple of occasions. House of Commons Procedures and Practice, page 619, references to the presence or the absence of a member or minister in the chamber are unacceptable. I am of a mind that this isn't a point of order. It's tough to know if the House was sitting or it wasn't. Was the member at home in the evenings? The reference was not, I would suggest, clear enough to imply that the Premier was not in the chamber, although I will say we all know what the Honourable Member for Edmonton Millwoods was endeavouring to do. While she may not have technically broke the rules, we can't do indirectly what we can do directly, and so I would encourage members of the opposition who would like to ask questions in this vein in the future to do so slightly more cleverly. I consider this not a point of order. The matter is dealt with and concluded. Point of order 2 and 3 of the Honourable Government House Leader at 203, 204 have been withdrawn. And that takes us to point of order, point of order 4, I believe, the Government House Leader has been withdrawn, and that takes us to the Honourable Member for Calgary-McCall at 205, called a point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think that was point of order just before 205 when a member was asking a question and leader of the official opposition was leaving, and the Government House Leader was clearly saying things that will create disorder, that she cannot stay for the whole QP. As Minister of Jobs and Employment said, that it's pretty cut and dry, that we don't refer to presence or absence of members. So in that case, Government House Leader was quite loud about her absence from the House or her leaving the House. That is clearly a point of order, and that's the kind of behavior that shouldn't be allowed in this chamber.
The Honourable, the Deputy Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I mean, I don't know if there's any blues on this. I'm down on this end here. It's hard to hear people. We have masks on with what we're trying to do here. There's lots of banter goes back and forth on a regular basis. Lots of debate that goes on in this House. Mr. Speaker, I think if there's some clear thing that the member could point to that's on the record with any evidence, Mr. Speaker, other than some speculation as to what may or may not have been said, Mr. Speaker, that'd be one point that'd be helpful to have some clarification on. Down here, it's hard to hear, Mr. Speaker, again. We're all wearing masks. We only take our masks off when we're making formal remarks now in this chamber. So, again, we all know that clearly you cannot comment on whether or not somebody's in or out of the chamber, Mr. Speaker, but witty banter goes back and forth regularly in this chamber. Again, I don't know don't see any record on the blues or anything that the member's pointing to. I think that this is simply just banter going back and forth in the chamber that we have on a daily basis.
Honourable members, I am prepared to rule, and I do have the benefit of the blues. The honourable member for Calgary Curry was called upon. The government House Leader, according to the blues, said, "There she goes." Honourable member for I don't need help from the member for Edmonton Glenora while ruling on a point of order. I appreciate your generosity, but I certainly don't need your help. The member for Calgary Curry said, "Thank you, Mr. Speaker." The government House Leader, "There she goes. She can't stay for a whole question period." The Speaker, there was interjections. The Speaker called the House to order. A point of order was called. Well, I appreciate that the Speaker rarely makes comments on comments made off of the record. I think if Hansard can record comments in the blues, it's quite likely that those comments were what were made. This is a point of order. The member can apologize and withdraw, or the Deputy Government House Leader can apologize and withdraw on his behalf.
That on the House Leader's behalf, apologize and withdraw the comment.
Matter dealt with and concluded. An excellent apology. Honourable members, at 2:30, the opposition Deputy House Leader made another intervention. 2:29, the honourable member for Calgary McCall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise on 23J and will actually provide another opportunity for Deputy Government House Leader to withdraw and apologize. When my colleague from Edmonton Gold Bar was asking a question about parks, and he was referring to some previous press releases, something on government record, and member in his answer said that this member for misleading the House. I think government has every right to disagree what we say, but accusing members that they are misleading the House, that's cut and dry, and that's offside these rules, and it's clearly what we shouldn't be doing in this House. So I urge you to find this also a point of order. Thank you.
I would call upon the Deputy Government House Leader, but in light of the time and, quite frankly, my lack of patience for the ongoing discussion with respect to points of order, I won't be doing that. I do have the benefit of the blues. The Honourable Minister of Jobs, Economy and Innovation said this, time and time again, the members opposite have made misleading statements when it comes to parks. Very clearly stated the members opposite. What also happened in that same set of questioning is the honourable member for Edmonton Gold Bar accused the government of lying at length yesterday. And on numerous occasions in the past 2 weeks, I have spoken about this very issue. If anyone uses the accusation that the government is lying or the opposition is lying, in the dying days of this session, we will be moving to other questioners. I consider this matter dealt with and concluded. We are at orders of the day, orders du jour.
Under Government Bills and Orders for third reading, Bill 43, Financing Alberta's Strategic Transportation Act. Honourable Mr. McIver.
The Honourable Minister of Transportation.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you for recognizing me. I rise to move third reading of Bill 43, the Financing Alberta's Strategic Transportation Act. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to begin by discussing some of the key parts of the bill and conclude with some refutation of the cavalcade of comedy coming from my friends across the aisle. The FAST Act creates a regulatory framework for user fees on new and expanded infrastructure projects in Alberta. Alberta's government currently does not have the authority to enact user fees on a project. The FAST Act is enabling legislation with a fence around it, Mr. Speaker, kind of like letting cattle out of the stall, but not free to run across the prairie. They're still restricted in a tightly controlled corral. And since one of my rural friends called that a good analogy, I take that as a big compliment. Alberta's government has been clear. We face a fiscal reckoning. We campaigned on finding creative ways to build new infrastructure, projects that wouldn't otherwise get built, or to get projects built faster than they otherwise would. User finance construction strengthens economic growth and competitiveness at a time when Albertans need it the most. This means faster commutes, less congestion, while unleashing economic potential through speeding up commerce in carefully selected locations. We are open to building projects that wouldn't otherwise get built or building new projects faster through user fees. As well, if other municipalities came to the province and asked for a creative way to build new infrastructure, projects that wouldn't otherwise get built or built within the time frame that they would want, we at least want to be able to work with them. However, we acknowledge that user pay is a new concept in Alberta, and Albertans may legitimately be hesitant about user pay projects in some cases. To provide certainty, we built a strong fence to assure Albertans that tolls will have rigorous oversight by enshrining very clear principles right within the text of the legislation. First, user fees can only finance new or expanded transportation infrastructure. The Act explicitly forbids user fees on existing lanes and bridges. Second, Albertans must be engaged before a project can be built using user fees. There can be no toll surprises. Third, those Albertans who do not wish to pay user fees must always have a non-toll alternative. So in other words, if you want to live your whole life in Alberta and not pay a toll on our roads and bridges, you can do that, period. Revenue collected can only be used to cover the cost of the user fee project. It cannot go into general revenue purposes. And lastly, once the capital cost of the project is paid off, the toll or the fee must stop being collected. Additionally, the legislation also gives the Minister of Transportation the ability to create exemptions to the fee, such as for snowplows, fire trucks, ambulances, and the ability to suspend the collection of a toll, for example, if people are escaping a wildfire or a flood. Each project must be enabled through a regulation passed by Cabinet, including but not limited to the toll amount, different fees for different vehicle types, for example, one fee for commercial trucks and another fee for passenger cars, and the manner in which to pay the fee, and so on. The legislation balances the need for Alberta to find creative ways to finance strategic transportation infrastructure while ensuring there are rigorous checks and balances on what projects can be built using a fee. Mr. Speaker, there's a clear need for new and creative ways to finance infrastructure in Alberta. We campaigned on a promise to introduce those new and creative ways and to incentivize private sector investment to build more and more infrastructure. The Premier said that user fees would be considered, and they are now being considered. We are keeping our promises and delivering new and accelerated infrastructure for Albertans with clear and reasonable checks and balances. The FAST Act doesn't replace government-funded infrastructure, it adds to it. Now, I'd like to respond to some of the arguments, or at least assertions, from the other side. It's disappointing the opposition tactics have mostly been to set up a straw man based on something not in the legislation and then knock it down. What that tells me is that the NDP have nothing real in the legislation to attack, so they're forced to make up issues and then attempt to argue about those. Most MDP members who spoke to the FAST Act perpetuated what is not true. I invited them to read the legislation before they decided to oppose it. Clearly, they chose otherwise. And their imaginations, Mr. Speaker, are breathtaking. Let me start with the facts. Before the last election, the now Premier very clearly said that user fees were, quote, on the table. Our party platform said that we need to find new and creative ways to fund infrastructure. The now Premier said that in places where it makes sense, we would look at user fees to build major infrastructure. And yet, when I introduced Bill 43 in this place, the NDP claimed user fees were explicitly ruled out in the last election. Clearly not true. Page 29 in our campaign platform, for those who care to look it up, promised to use alternative financing to build new infrastructure, and the Premier clearly said so. Promise made, promise kept. Then, in subsequent debates, the member for Edmonton City Centre said that when, quote, when the Premier mused about alternative financing, perhaps to some industrial infrastructure would apply. Now, wait a minute. The NDP leader said in no uncertain terms that Bill 43 is a, quote, a profound breach of what the Premier promised Albertans, which isn't true. Then the member for Edmonton City Centre said that the government did mention it before the last election in contravention of his own leader, but not in the way that we remember. They flip-flopped a lot. No apology for falsely calling out the Premier, just a flip followed by a flop. Maybe there's a division in their caucus about how to properly define the truth. Heaven knows they've argued a lot about the definitions in the FAST Act. When I introduced the legislation at second reading, the member for Edmonton South spoke at length about the definition of highway. He repeated the definition of highway used in the Traffic Safety Act, which is interesting given that I said in my opening remarks that the definition of highway used in the FAST Act is the one from the Highways Development and Protection Act, which is what gives Alberta Transportation the authority to own and maintain roads in the province. The NDP claimed that the definition of highway in the FAST Act is too broad and that this would give license to put, wait for it, tolls on ditches. You can't make this up, Mr. Speaker. The punchlines write themselves. I'm not sure what the problem the NDP is that they're trying to solve. The definition of highway in the Highway Development Act has been around since long before my 2012 tour in Alberta Transportation. Clearly, the definition wasn't an issue when the NDP were in power, but suddenly the walls are tumbling down now that the definition is still there. It seems disingenuous to ignore something during your tenure only to complain about it now that someone else is in charge. But that's just par for the course, another day for the NDP. It's disheartening. This is a forward-thinking piece of legislation that will enable Albertans like those in Lacrete who have suffered with the ferry for decades. A concern that the NDP ignored to finally get a bridge. But rather than debate the merits of the bill, the NDP want to quibble over a definition of a highway. The NDP's favorite talking point has been that the UCP government is going to start tolling ditches. Well, thanks to the safeguards in the FAST Act, we can't impose a toll without doing a consultation. So I can't wait, Mr. Speaker, and I'm sure you too look forward to when we have put out a news release that we're going to do a consultation on tolling a ditch. Sounds silly to say that out loud. I don't know how the opposition keeps a straight face when they say it. So ridiculous, I posted their attack on my Facebook page. Next, the member for Edmonton Beverly Clairview said something funny in the Assembly the other day, that if the bill were narrowly focused on a bridge to replace the Lacrete ferry, then maybe the NDP could get behind it. It's funny because when we announced that we would be engaging those in Lacrete on a toll bridge to replace the ferry, after those from Lacrete told us to do so, the NDP put out a press release that was the written equivalent of a head explosion. They claimed that the big bad Premier was going to reach in and take money out of the pockets of Albertans himself, that the government would toll every road in Alberta, the same hyperbole they have used in the Assembly. So no, despite the wild claims from the members opposite, including Edmonton Beverly Clairview, the NDP arguments would have been the same regardless of the legislation. Fortunately, the legislation itself says exactly the opposite. Existing roads and bridges are forbidden from a user fee. Next, member from Edmonton McClung said that we've seen, quote, horrific examples, unquote, of toll roads gone sideways. He conveniently neglected to name even one. Not one. Although he said there were horrific examples. It defies credibility. Maybe the 407 and highway used by hundreds of thousands of people every day and often referred to as the most successful toll road in the world. Or maybe perhaps the Coca-Cola Highway, or the Decho Bridge, or the Confederation Bridge. All examples of infrastructure that would not exist today had they not been tolled. It's easy to assert that something is, quote, horrific, but if you fail to provide any evidence, as the member did, then the assertion itself fails, particularly when you look at examples of actual successful toll projects in Canada and around the world. Next, the same member said that he doesn't want tolls because, quote, a number of times, ooh, that's ominous, a number of times, he received a bill in the mail and didn't even realize he used a toll road. Well, I don't know how to respond to that. There are usually signs in large letters that say toll road before you get on a road. Giant cameras, transponders, and even a label on Google Maps. The member should put down the NDP playbook and watch the signs next time he's driving in Europe or Australia. There's no such thing as a, quote, secret toll road, particularly not on Alberta under this bill, given that, as I said, the government needs to conduct a robust public consultation before it can introduce a toll road and can only enable an additional toll road through regulation passed by Cabinet, which is publicly reported as described in the FAST Act. Then he claimed that tourists won't want to come to Alberta and that, quote, toll roads are an anathema, well, that's a good word, to guests in this country. This is a silly argument that he uses himself undermines right after, because he goes on to talk about all the toll roads that exist in countries that he visited as a tourist, like Australia, the United States, Europe, New Zealand, virtually every jurisdiction except Alberta. Clearly the toll roads weren't enough to keep that member from going there and spending his tourism dollars, nor would visitors from those areas who already live with toll roads be surprised or discouraged that Alberta does the same. And more importantly, tourists come to Alberta because of the Rocky Mountains, our prairie hospitality, the Badlands, the cities, the Calgary Stampede, the exhibits in Edmonton and area, all the beauty and fun of our great province has to offer. Now, Mr. Speaker, it breaks my heart to say it, but tourists don't come to Alberta for the roads. I know, it hurts me too. But I can say for darn sure that if we don't continue building infrastructure to meet growing demand, then we won't be able to handle more tourists. The FAST Act enables government to add to the existing list of public infrastructure, to build even more roads and bridges, to lessen congestion, unleashing economic potential through speeding up commerce, including tourism. And lastly, if tourists who don't pay taxes in Alberta but use our infrastructure have to contribute a bit to the construction of that new infrastructure, I'm confident most Albertans would see that as exceedingly fair. So, the members' comments fall short. How much time do I have, Mr. Speaker, can I ask?
Still about 8 minutes.
Thank you. So, the members' comments fall short. The worst argument I've heard the NDP make is that the government is imposing a toll bridge on the people of Lacrete. The leader of the opposition said so. My opposition critic said so. And most members on the opposite side that spoken have claimed that the government is forcing a toll onto the good citizens of the North. The member from Edmonton Manning called the toll bridge, quote, an attack on Albertans. What a ridiculous line. I invite any NDP to visit the people of Lacrete and ask them if the government is forcing a toll on them. They should do themselves a favor. Hang up the phone, say goodbye to Gil, venture out of the Edmonton bubble, and have a conversation with a rural Albertan. They failed to do it for 4 years in government. Maybe they'll try it in opposition. When they've had a conversation at the Lacrete coffee shop about a toll bridge, then we could talk about what rural Albertans from that area think. The county, the Chamber of Commerce, businesses, individuals, hundreds of people have told me in no uncertain terms, build the bridge. I've shared the letters, read pieces of them out loud in the chamber. Still, the NDP doubt they exist. Their rejection of reality boggles the mind, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when the opposition rhetoric consists of setting up straw man arguments to claim what they know is not in the bill, it's obvious they've lost the argument. Whether it's tolling ditches and sidewalks, the definition of a highway, effects on tourism, who said what in the last campaign, or what rural Albertans actually think about this bridge, the NDP have been wrong each and every time. And rather than focus on the issue or the merits of the bill, they are stuck repeating the pointless argument about how to define a highway. Wow. Mr. Speaker, Alberta faces a fiscal reckoning. We need to find creative ways to build new infrastructure projects that wouldn't otherwise get built, and ways to build projects that we can't afford right now faster. Most other provinces, states, and countries have a record of successfully financing select construction projects using user fees. The first project proposed under the FAST Act is a new bridge on Highway 697 over the Peace River to replace the aging Lacrete Ferry at Tompkins Landing. No government from the past, not NDP, not Conservative, none of them identified the bridge in previous capital plans. Both Mackenzie County and the Lacrete Chamber of Commerce advocated for a user fee to build the bridge now, and we are happy to accept, subject, of course, to this legislation passing. The FAST Act will strengthen economic growth and competitiveness at a time when Albertans need it most. This means, in the right circumstances, faster commutes, less congestion, while unleashing economic potential through speeding up commerce, and maybe less babies between Lacrete and Fort Vermilion born on the highway, if the trip to the hospital is shorter. I am proud to support the FAST Act. I'm grateful for the debate, and I respectfully ask all members of this Assembly to support Bill 43, the FAST Act.
Here. Thank you, Honourable Members. The Minister has moved third reading. I see the Honourable Member for Edmonton, Glenora, has risen to debate.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and to the Minister for his opening remarks for Bill 3, or the third reading of his bill as we consider it here today. I want to say, first of all, if he's using the 407 as a model of excellence, there's a lot of working people in Ontario who would disagree with him. That has driven up costs exponentially for commuting families who particularly live in suburban communities and have to commute into the GTA or specifically into the core of Toronto. And many reports, it's all over the news. I don't have to do the Googling for the minister, but there are many folks who've reported having to pay thousands of dollars in fines and fees, and it has been a significant hardship for many Ontario families. So if that is his model of excellence, and if that is what he wants to see here in the province of Alberta, I have grave concerns, Mr. Speaker. I also want to touch on a few things. He did say that it was about newer expanded infrastructure, and when specifically asked in the media, would this account for things like the expansion to things like the QE2 or the Deerfoot if there was an expanded lane? He refused to rule that out and confirmed that that would be the definition of expansion, that if it was initially 2 lanes and it was replaced as 2 lanes, that wouldn't be an expansion or a new project, but that if it was wider, that would be expanded, and therefore absolutely it would be or could be on the receiving end of tolls. So I have to say that a lot of folks drive the QE2 and the Deerfoot on a regular basis for work, for example, or in non-COVID times to take their children to or from activities or school. And when we raised this concern in the election period or leading up to the election period last year, there's a lot of coverage of it from January 17th, 2019. And I'll be happy to provide copies to answer because I'm going to quote some of this shortly. The Premier, who was the NDP leader of the NDP and continues to be, highlighted her concerns based on things that have been floated, including things that are referenced in what now the minister is trying to say was a mandate for bringing in tolls that they so clearly ran on now, he's saying. But when communications personnel from the leader of the official opposition, now Premier's office, were asked to respond to the comments that were raised around concerns that our leader highlighted about this driving up costs for everyday families in the province of Alberta. Myatt told Global News, for example, on Thursday, this was the January 17th, 2019, that the member for Lougheed was floating an idea and an innovative way to pay for infrastructure that Alberta desperately needs but can't afford. She said the concept hasn't been developed and it wouldn't be until the UCP became government until elected. But then she goes on to say that user pay idea for industrial infrastructure, not for public projects, and that the idea that family soccer runs would have to pay for a toll is, quote, out to lunch. So don't take my word for it, Minister. Take the word of your own communications personnel who were providing these assurances to Albertans. So was it then the communications personnel that were wrong? Were you always intending to tax and create tolls on these roads? Because right now you're saying that that's what the platform said. But clearly when asked to explain that to Albertans who were concerned about those fears, the communications personnel in the pre-election period said absolutely not. It wouldn't be for ordinary projects that ordinary families would use. It would just be for industrial projects. Now, I want to unpack that just a little bit. First of all, it speaks to the government's record on this and how clearly they have broken a campaign promise and a commitment that was made in the pre-campaign period around affordability. And to refer to the then Premier, our leader, as being out to lunch, when clearly what's out to lunch is this government's backpedal and spin in trying to justify breaking such a foundational promise that was made during the pre-election period. But I also want to say that in terms of industrial projects, and I appreciate that the minister said that there would be a different rate, that there would be a $150 fee for large commercial traffic and somewhere between 10 and 20 for personal traffic. When you think about commercial traffic, and I also appreciate knowing how expensive fuel is, and particularly when you're hauling grain or other large cargo, how heavy a vehicle can impact your fuel costs so exponentially. So I totally get that there would be a business case that would account for many of these businesses choosing to use the toll as opposed to driving the detour. I do appreciate that. But they also have the opportunity then to deduct the cost of said tolls as a business expense. So when it comes to filing taxes and paying their fair share, already the government's made a decision to give away $4.7 billion to large corporations through a tremendous gift. And now, obviously, if there is a payment for using a toll, that also costs towards a business expense. So it impacts the amount that corporations are asked to pay in terms of fair compensation. So I want to say that there will absolutely be some subsidy given, and if that's the government's decision, so be it. But please, let's own the fact that there will still be public money that goes into this, because there will be less revenue coming in to the province to help pay for these types of projects in other parts of the province. So just own it. The other thing I want to say is I was in the House when questions were asked by the member for Lethbridge West around the Lethbridge Bridge expansion in the city of Lethbridge, a project that I was really proud that we were bringing forward, and that is, I believe, still moving forward for the city of Lethbridge. And there was absolute refusal to say that that bridge expansion would be not subject to tolls. And there were about 3 different opportunities given to the government to quash any fears or concerns about that. So we have the minister in media availabilities talking about that absolutely this could apply to expansions of existing roads like the Deerfoot, like the QE2, even potentially, he didn't say this one, but even potentially the Yellowhead, which is a big concern for me as well, and for many Albertans and people from across Canada who travel and rely on the Yellowhead to access many things to the east and the west of where we are right now. And then the opportunity 3 times to alleviate fears and concerns for people in Lethbridge about their bridge expansion that they have been waiting for patiently and advocating for so many years. So again, it is absolutely clear. It's in black and white on my computer screen, in print, all over the place from January of 2019, that the government refuted that this would apply to anything other than industrial projects. They said that it would only be industrial projects, that it wouldn't be broader than that. Then we have, many times in this House, the minister using the example of Lacrete as to why this bill needs to go through. And I and many of my colleagues have asked the clear question, if this is about one specific project in one specific region, why not make the bill about that? We've done that in this House in the past, had specific bills for specific initiatives that were developed locally, and I appreciate that he did consult on this. I take him at his word that the vast majority agree with the consultation and said that they support this project. I have no reason to believe otherwise. But he definitely didn't consult with all Albertans to move forward on this. In fact, when they were consulting with Albertans and conducting the last election, they were very clear to say that this wouldn't be something that would be moving forward in the province of Alberta on a large scale. And definitely this bill is enabling and creates a very large plethora of opportunities for the government to reach into the pockets of everyday families and take out another 10, 20, $150 on a regular basis if they so choose. And that definitely isn't what the government ran on. They ran on reducing costs for ordinary families. They ran on making life more affordable. They ran on jobs and the economy. They have failed on all of those fronts. And I have to say that the sweeping implications of this legislation, I think, are negative. I think they are opposed to what the government said they would do. And I think to attest anything else is disingenuous and defies the facts that have clearly been reported to the people of Alberta over the last 2 years. So with that being said, I continue to be very frustrated by the government's failure to own the fact that they have made an intentional decision to break their campaign promise and to try to pretend and play word salad to try to justify their complete backtracking on what was very clearly laid out by the Communications Department serving the now Premier, that this was absolutely not the direction that the government would be moving in, that this wouldn't have implications on ordinary soccer families traveling throughout the province, when clearly this bill will and can moving forward, Mr. Speaker. So that being said, I will continue to voice my frustration and concern when the government breaks their commitments to the people of Alberta. I think that's one of the things that the job of the opposition is to do, and the government shouldn't be surprised if they continue to break their word and continue to erode the trust of the public, that we will call them out on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honourable Member.
I see the Honourable Member for Calgary West has risen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to request that we move to 1-minute bells for the remainder of the afternoon.
A request has been made which would require unanimous consent to move to 1-minute bells. So I will ask this question only once. If there is anyone opposed to this, please say so now. Unanimous consent is granted. We are moving to 1-minute bells. Are there any honourable members looking to join debate? I see the Honourable Member for Lethbridge East has risen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the opportunity to rise and talk about Bill 43 that the Honourable Minister of Transportation has brought forward. I feel it is a very well-balanced approach to adding horizontal infrastructure to the province. And I would like to correct some of the arguments brought forward by the member from Lethbridge West last night, particularly about our government's character and commitments, and about the $100 million promised for Highway 3 Bridge. And I would like to go back and just set the record straight on a few things in terms of the dates and the commitments, particularly because it involves Lethbridge and it is a critical piece of infrastructure. I have done extensive research into the last budget tabled by the former government, the NDP government, 2018-2019, and there is indeed the Old Man River Bridge on Highway 3 in Lethbridge on there for $3.4 million for some upgrades that did happen, and we're appreciative of that. It is a bridge and it needed some repairs, and those repairs were done. Unfortunately for the NDP, there was never another budget tabled in 2019-2020 until much later in the year, and it did not include any further funding for the bridge in Lethbridge. What did happen on March 15th, 2019 was that the NDP made a promise for $100 million for the Highway 3 bridge. But if I remember correctly, maybe the Minister of Transportation help me out, there's something else that went on in March and April of 2019. Oh, that's right. There was an election called. And what date was that bridge dropped, I wonder? Oh, March 19th, 2019, just 4 days after that promise. Unfortunately for the NDP, there was, I think, something like $9 billion of additional promises made within that time frame. Even more. Thank you, Minister. So these are promises that were made by the NDP, the former government. It didn't help them win that election. It was their promises that went unfulfilled. What the Premier, the then leader of the official opposition, did say at the time was that any projects committed to the capital infrastructure plan would be followed through on. Unfortunately, that one wasn't. And I do appreciate their efforts to rewrite history, but unfortunately, the facts are very, very clear. There's a lot of promises made during that time frame, but we have been in office since April 16th and followed through on many of those promises. So like I said at the beginning, I do support this legislation and the consideration of moving projects forward where communities agree and support a toll. That is not necessarily the case for everywhere, but it is in the bridge in Lacrete. And I'm very thankful that it has not been the case for the Highway 3 twinning expansion of $150 million from Taber to Burdett, which will have massive economic impacts to Lethbridge and area, an incredible increase in safety, and another project put forward by this minister, so I appreciate and thank him for that as well. And I do think that the constituents of Lacrete and that area would thank the minister for saving them the cost of an additional hour-and-a-half drive each way, or of paying for a ferry ride. And again, I fully support this legislation as well thought through, good options with the agreement to consult in future areas if Lethbridge is fortunate enough to have a third bridge in a timely manner to support our growing population. That would be something I'd look forward to that conversation in the future. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Are there any members wishing to join debate on this bill? Seeing none, I am prepared to ask the question. However, I will offer the opportunity to the Minister of Transportation to close should he so choose, and he has risen. So the Minister of Transportation has the call.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I will be brief, but I'll make a few brief closing remarks. A few things need to be clarified and corrected here that come from the other side. Mr. Speaker, as the honourable member from Lethbridge, from our side of the aisle, said that yes, in Lethbridge, that bridge there was just several $1 million spent on it very few years ago. So I'm a little surprised by the member on the opposite wanting to have that tore out and waste that very new investment right now to replace that bridge. Yes, it's clear there's a desire. The mayor has expressed it to me from Lethbridge that he'd like to see that bridge replaced one day, but the mayor also understands that we just finished spending several $1 million on that bridge. So that's and to be clear, it's a great game that the NDPs could play, is to say every project, are you going to charge a toll on it? I guess, well, the answer today is no, but the fact is, no, that there will never be a surprise. The legislation requires us to do a public consultation. A public consultation. So right now, there is only one project that we are contemplating doing a toll on, and never will there be a surprise. There will always be a consultation. And right in the legislation, it's project by project consultation. So if in the future, we may never propose another toll project, and we may. We've never shied away from that fact. We can't do it until after we do a public consultation. So it's there you go, Mr. Speaker. It's right in the legislation. A project by project consultation has to happen right in the legislation. We didn't give our. We did see the folks out. So I'm quoting from the legislation, Mr. Speaker, and the folks from the other side can't stand themselves because the truth is so painful to them. It's so painful to hear over there when somebody's telling the facts. So the consultation in the legislation is project by project. The Lethbridge Bridge was just repaired, and at the appropriate time, we'll continue to talk with the people of Lethbridge, and our great member of our caucus down there is a terrific voice for the city of Lethbridge, who never lets me or other ministers forget about what's important to the people in Lethbridge. So, Mr. Speaker, again, I'll repeat it because the member across who spoke either ignored or didn't hear or didn't recognize what I said in my remarks. On our platform, for those who care to look it up, on page 29, you talk about we intend to use alternative financing to help build more infrastructure to build it forward. It was a campaign promise. Today, if this bill passes, is a promise made and a promise kept, Mr. Speaker, because that's the way we intend to do business here in the UCP. And with that, I will sit and I will respectfully ask members of this Assembly to support this bill.
Thank you, Honourable Minister. The Honourable Minister of Transportation has moved third reading of Bill 43, Financing Alberta's Strategic Transportation Act. Those in favour of the motion for third reading, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. No. That is carried. However, a division has been called. Call in the members. question of third reading for Bill 43, Financing Alberta's Strategic Transportation Act. All those in favor of third reading of the Act, please rise and be counted.
Ms. Lovely. Ms. Armstrong-Homenuk, Honourable Mr. McIver, Mr. Getson, Mr. Lowen, Mr. Turton, Mr. Ellis, Mr. Newdorf, Honourable Mr. Schweitzer, Ms. Rosen, Mr. Walker, Mr. Amory, Mr. Rosewell, Mr. Yassine, and Mr. Smith.
Thank you. All those members opposed to third reading, please rise and be counted.
Mr. Savier, Mr. Schmidt, Member Hoffman, Mr. Egan, Mr. Fian, Ms. Pancholi, Mr. Shepherd.
Mr. Speaker, total for the motion 15, total against 7.
Thank you. That motion is carried and so ordered.
Bill 43, Financing Alberta's Strategic Transportation Act, is now read a third time. Under Government Bills and Orders for second reading, Bill 46, Health Statutes Amendment Act 2020, number 2, debate adjourned on amendment. Mr. Shepherd speaking.
Are there any honourable members wishing to join debate? I see the honourable member for Edmonton Whitemud has risen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to rise again to speak in second reading on Bill 46, the Health Statutes Amendment Act, and on the amendment that's before the Chamber today. Mr. Speaker, Bill 46, although we've had repeated, examples in this legislature of bills being brought forward by the government that have not been the result of proper consultation, have not been actually even timely considering the unique and unprecedented circumstances we are currently in Alberta. And I have to say, Mr. Speaker, it has been quite shocking to a number of Albertans and my constituents to know that during the time of this pandemic that we are in this House, not only are we debating significant pieces of legislation that are completely unrelated to the direct reality that most Albertans are experiencing right now. Certainly, I don't know that this is the time that many Albertans are thinking they'd like a toll road put in place, Mr. Speaker, but also that at the same time that we are in this incredibly challenging public health emergency, that we're also seeing pieces of legislation being brought forward by this government that undermine our very healthcare system. We are currently debating before this legislature Bill 47, which actually actively seeks to make workplaces more unsafe by reducing supports for workers who are in unsafe conditions, taking away rights and benefits and privileges that they have as workers at a time when not only our healthcare system and our healthcare workers who are tirelessly working in very, very risky situations every day, but also we know that frontline workers across the board, whether it's in healthcare or not, are also in incredibly challenging health circumstances right now, and yet this is the time that the government is choosing to limit their rights and protections with respect to safety. So that's mind-boggling, Mr. Speaker, but here we are again with another bill before this House, Bill 46, that actually seeks, again, at a time when Albertans are most concerned about their health, perhaps than any other time in the recent history, now this government has brought forward a bill that would actually share and disclose their health information to entities outside of Alberta. And in doing so, they failed to even consult with the most knowledgeable and expert individual with respect to information and privacy protection, who is the Information and Privacy Commissioner. And to proceed with that at this time, first of all, on that basis alone, Mr. Speaker, that we should be focused, and I'd like to see our government focus focus as much as possible, Mr. Speaker, on actually focusing on the health care challenge that's before them. We've seen the members opposite stand up over and over during this time and seemingly obsessed with the members of the opposition, seemingly obsessed with our debate and our comments in this legislature. I don't know who they're speaking to, Mr. Speaker. I don't know who their audience is right now, because who they should be speaking to, who really needs to hear from this government and hear from this Premier and see some leadership, are Albertans. I know they think that this is some kind of game that goes on in here, but what they're doing right now is deeply affecting Albertans in every single way. And on those issues that most matter to them, they're silent. But they've got a lot to say about a lot of things that are not only irrelevant right now to many Albertans' lives, but are actually going to make their lives worse. And here we have the same thing happening again, Mr. Speaker. With Bill 46, we have a bill that's meant to put health information at risk. And that's the goal of these amendments that we're seeing put forward by this government right now. We are seeing them bring forward a piece of legislation that the Information and Privacy Commissioner has taken the unusual step of actually standing up and speaking out against, because she was not consulted and she has very significant concerns about a number of the measures within this bill. So, for example, Mr. Speaker, having worked a little bit myself within the information and privacy world, we know that is all about a balance. It's all about a balance between being able to collect, to use, to disclose health information, but also equally as important, to protect the privacy of those individuals about that information. And that balance seems to be completely irrelevant to this government right now. They're trying to tip the balance in the other direction, which is that they're not concerned about the privacy of health information of Albertans. In fact, I want to read a quote, Mr. Speaker, from the Information and Privacy Commissioner, a news release issued on November 13th, 2020. And this is a quote from Jill Clayton, the Information and Privacy Commissioner. She states, "While many jurisdictions around the world are introducing new or enhanced privacy laws to build public trust and ensure accountability mechanisms are in place to protect personal or health information, many of the proposed amendments to the HIA, the Health Information Act, are heading in the other direction." So, Mr. Speaker, I don't know why this government would choose this point in time to actually actively make privacy protections weaker for Albertans. Let's talk about what health information is. I mean, in the Health Information Act, we know that health information means diagnostic, treatment, and care information, or registration information. These are critically, this is so fundamentally deeply personal. But we know in health information, and currently the Health Information Act recognizes this, that there are significant circumstances due to the unique context of health information where consent isn't actually sought. In many other respects with personal information, we have information and privacy schemes in place that do seek as their first step to get consent before you can disclose or use personal information. But there is a recognition that health information is a unique quality. We know that in order to provide appropriate treatment for individuals, in order to get the right health individuals involved to be able to provide care, we also know that for many other purposes we have an interest in health information, and I don't think that could be more evident than right now, Mr. Speaker, where we know that there is significant information about Albertans' health that is not being used, that is not being shared, that is not forming the basis of decision-making by this government. But health information is critical, and it's unique. There isn't a consent scheme in place the same way there is with other personal information. But because of that, because of the unique quality of health information, we have a legislative scheme that seeks to make sure that there are as many protection measures taken as possible, because we're not always seeking the consent of that individual before we disclose or share health information. And so it's even more important that those prescribed limits around privacy protections that are in the Health Information Act are absolutely bolstered and protected, because they aren't as great as they are in other schemes around information and privacy protection. So we need to make sure that what's there is protected. And yeah, what we see in Bill 46 is actually a significant effort to undermine that. The Privacy Commissioner stated that she's absolutely shocked, and I'll perhaps actually, Mr. Chair or Mr. Speaker, I'll read her quote. Yes, it is shocked. She said, "Frankly, it is shocking and disappointing to see an amendment that proposes to remove the privacy impact assessment requirement that supports and documents the assessment of privacy risk and ensures that reasonable controls are in place." And this is from her letter, Mr. Speaker, also dated November 13th, 2020. Bill 46 actually says that Alberta Health Alberta Health Services and the Health Quality Council of Alberta is not required to do a privacy impact assessment. And that is shocking our Information and Privacy Commissioner. And we have yet to hear a clear explanation from this government as to why. There's absolutely no way that this bill should be going forward, considering the significant impact it has on the privacy of Albertans around the protection of their deeply personal health information, without absolute consultation with the Information and Privacy Commissioner, but also consulting with Albertans. Because I don't think right now that Albertans have a lot of trust in this government for many, many reasons, which I could go on at length about, which I won't do right now. But certainly, trust is the key part, especially when we're talking about personal information. And they're breaking trust by saying they don't even have to do a privacy impact assessment, which says what are the measures in place to protect the privacy of Albertans' personal health information. They don't even want to do that anymore. And given the example that we have had with this government already, for example, the Babylon app, which is also, we know, Mr. Chair or Mr. Speaker, that that app was introduced as the pandemic was beginning. It was launched with great fanfare by this government, and then it became clear in that situation that there was no privacy impact assessment done on that. And again, the Information and Privacy Commission is currently investigating that, Mr. Speaker, because there are significant concerns about the sharing of personal health information. But this bill allows organizations and entities and individuals outside of the jurisdiction of Alberta to be able to use health information with no recourse, with no requirement to follow, and no recourse by Albertans to follow the Health Information Act. That's what this government has done. And given the example that we have with the Babylon app, which, by the way, is also, as we will all recall, was brought in by the government and the providers of health advice under that app actually got paid more than our doctors here in Alberta. The doctors who are providing care during a pandemic were getting paid less than those providing services through this app. I mean, that's clearly what this government's agenda is about. Is about taking away the ability of doctors in this province to do their job. We know that they've been on the attack of doctors from the beginning, since they were elected, and they carried through with that ridiculous agenda, even through the greatest public health crisis that this province has faced in generations. But they chose to pursue that. And we know now that this is clearly, they don't believe in privacy impact assessments. If you take the Babylon example, and now that they're trying to exempt themselves, the ministries, the Alberta Health Services, the Health Quality Council of Alberta, from requiring to do privacy impact assessment, where is the balance from this government in protecting personal information of Albertans? They clearly are not committed to that, Mr. Speaker, and for that reason alone, that they can't justify why they're doing this, and they have not consulted with the Information and Privacy Commissioner, I believe strongly that this bill should not go forward at this time. They need to do their work, and they need to prove to Albertans that they can be trusted with the decisions they're making about their health information. Because right now, they have not proven that. They've broken trust with Albertans over and over again, and by ramming through this bill, or trying to, without proper consultation, without talking to Albertans about the implications, without justifying the decisions that they've made, this bill should not move forward. And therefore, I believe, Mr. Speaker, that all members of this Assembly should, including government members, take a pause and say, you know what? Until we can provide confidence to Albertans that we are looking out for their best interests, not the best interests of companies and organizations outside of this province, not the best interests of TELUS, but actually looking after the best interests of Albertans, which is their job, Mr. Speaker. Until they can do that, this bill should not proceed. And I hope that the government members will take that to heart and take a pause and actually focus a little bit more on governing and focusing on what's really facing Albertans right now, which is a severe economic and health crisis. But they've been completely distracted by their own agenda and by whoever it is that's pulling the strings behind the decisions they're making and the bills they're bringing forward, which is not consistent with what Albertans are asking for. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. 29-2A is available for brief questions or comments. Seeing none, are there any members wishing to join debate? I see the Honourable Member for Edmonton Rutherford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the opportunity to address the House on this very, very problematic bill, Bill 46, and the changes that are being made to the health circumstances in this province. And having just listened to the member from Edmonton-Whitemud, I know that the points about privacy have been extremely well articulated and laid out. But I just want to, synthesize quickly for the people in the province of Alberta of what's happening with regard to the privacy, and then move on to another concern that I have. But with regard to the issue of privacy, the number of people that can access your file, the reasons they can access your file, and where they can take the information from your file, including outside of this jurisdiction of Alberta, have all been expanded by this government. That's it, plain and simple. Your personal health information is now going to be made available to foreign-funded corporations for their own purpose, where we have no controls to control their use of that information. That's it. That's the central point. Now, clearly, the government officer, Jill Clayton, who is responsible for privacy in this province, has said this is problematic. So the very person who has been set up to protect your privacy has said this is a problem and has asked that this bill be withdrawn until it can be corrected, and this government has failed to do so. So it's not fear-mongering on the part of the opposition in the House. It is a fact stated by the most knowledgeable privacy person in the province of Alberta, and it's quite simply being done to allow foreign-funded corporations to make a profit on your health information. That's it. That's what's happening. So since that has already been, I think, well articulated by the member from Edmonton, Whitemud, I'd like to move on to another part of the bill which I think is problematic, which isn't spoken of very often, and that is the decision by this government to force professional colleges to separate themselves into two separate units. That is the separation of the professional colleges and the professional associations in this bill. Now, a number of the associations actually have both functions, that is, the governance of practice of their practitioners and the advocacy of the concerns of the members under the same roof. And the government has decided that you shouldn't both have the same organization governing people with regard to their practice and also advocating for the nature of their practice, which is really reflective of a very old mindset of separating out these kind of activities. Because this government simply does not understand the implications of structural problems in the world today. They only believe that there are individual choices, and they do not believe that the nature of the way society is constructed sometimes is itself the problem. They've been opposed to any kind of examination of structural issues, and this is another step toward separating those two out. But I want to say that there are many organizations that don't have that failure that this government has of separating those two out, that understand that good practice is also often about advocacy. And I'd just like to use the Alberta College of Social Workers as an example because of my previous experience of having been a member of this organization. They have, of course, with their professional college, have put together a quite comprehensive guideline for competent practice, and they have a number of practices internally for assessing and regulating competent practice. And one of those things, of course, is a code of ethics. And that code of ethics describes in it some 6 different sets of values which overall archingly guide the practice of social work. The 6 values are not hierarchically ordered. All of them are considered equally important. And the one that happens to be labeled as value number 2 is the pursuit of social justice. Now, the point of reading this out here is the fact that to adhere to the code of ethics, social workers should be practicing in their practice a pursuit of social justice. So that is, competent social work practice actually involves the pursuit of justice, not just on individual practice level, but the larger social justice. And of course, they describe that as, quote, social workers believe in the obligation of people individually and collectively to provide resources, services, and opportunities for the overall benefit of humanity and to afford them protection from harm. So you're looking not just at the practices of an individual, but social workers in their practice must look at the collective responses, that is, the structural ways in which services are provided. They go on to say in their principles, which underlie the value of pursuit of social justice, one, quote, social workers uphold the right of people to have access to resources to meet basic human needs. Second, social workers advocate for fair and equitable access to public services and benefits. Third, social workers advocate for equal treatment and protection under the law and challenge injustices, especially injustices that affect the vulnerable and disadvantaged. And four, social workers promote social development and environmental management in the interests of all people. It is very clear in this statement from the Social Work Code of Ethics, which all social workers must adhere to in order to demonstrate competent practice, that they need to be looking at the issue of equitable access to public services. They need to be looking at the promotion of social development and environmental management in the interests of all people. They need to be looking at equal treatment and protection under the law and challenge injustices, especially injustices that affect the vulnerable and disadvantaged. That is, the pieces of work that must be done by the college, that is to assess whether or not you have done good practice, are also the same pieces that this government is trying to push out of the colleges and separate into colleges and associations. The intention here for the government is they're trying to find a way to push any criticism of this government out of the professional associations by setting it up so that anytime someone wants to criticize public policy, the government can say that is not the work of your college. That is the work of an association. If you want to join the association, go and join that. The hope is, of course, that they will then set up the situation where people are required to join their college, but not required to join their association. And as such, any advocacy for change on a structural societal level will be eliminated from these professional colleges by pushing them off into the association. The point is really clear that many people understand the nature of structural problems that cause issues for people in society, particularly those who are most vulnerable or disadvantaged. And this government does not want to hear it. The intention of this part of the Act is simply to silence opposition or appropriate examination by appropriately trained professionals into the nature of the structures of society, particularly the structures established by government. This is a silencing of the people who have the very job to understand how these structures will influence your life and to advocate on your behalf to ensure that the structures of society, and particularly the structures of the ministries within the government, are doing things that are making your life more difficult and problematic. And this government does not want to hear it. It's simply a way of making sure that they can do whatever they want, and then when someone wishes to challenge them, they can tell them that they don't have a right to do that. And yet here it is. We're going to put social workers into a position where, in order to adhere to their code of ethics, they are going to be put in a problematic situation. That when they look at a situation for a client and say, this isn't just about the individual circumstance of this client, but it's how the whole system is organized that's caused the problem here. And they wish to advocate for policies that change the overall system, they will be seen to be in contempt of the separation of colleges and associations in order to remove the ability for these professionals to advocate on behalf of their citizens. As such, I think this is really an underhanded, sneaky way of the government of silencing people who will be looking at what they're doing, who will be advocating for their clients, who will be advocating for the citizens of the province of Alberta, and making sure that when they do horrendous things, as they have continuously done throughout this session, that affect the citizens of the province of Alberta negatively, that the professionals who would be aware of that and who would have the skills and training to be able to respond to that will be silenced. And this is completely unacceptable. And as such, I would ask that all members of this House reject this bill and accept the amendments presented by the opposition to refer this bill for further consultation before implementation, along with the recommendations of the Privacy Commissioner. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. 29-2A is available. I see the Honourable Member for Edmonton City Centre has risen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the opportunity to respond with a few comments to the thoughts put forward by my colleague from Edmonton Rutherford. I certainly do hear the concerns he brings forward, and certainly we have seen that this is a government that has been incredibly oppositional towards any groups of professional organizations of health professionals in the province of Alberta. Certainly their ongoing feud with the Alberta Medical Association, their war on doctors, the responses we have seen from the Minister of Health towards the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Alberta, attempting to use them as a proxy to cover for the damage he was doing in driving doctors out of the province of Alberta. But one other issue I have heard raised around this particular bill and this change to divide the regulatory colleges from advocacy organizations or organizations that are outside of that is with the separation of CARNA. Now, CARNA is a representative for registered nurses of Alberta. And then, of course, you have UNA, which is the United Nurses of Alberta. Now, I have heard that in some cases, nurses that have discipline charges brought against them by AHS for particular reasons, and then have the support of UNA as their union to help them fight that complaint. In some cases where they are indeed successful in fighting the complaint and they are absolved under AHS, then there will also be a complaint filed with CARNA. And CARNA then, despite the fact that through the employment process that nurse has been acquitted, will still proceed to file a complaint and to allow that to go through. Now, the concern that I've had raised is that under this bill, folks that work in management at AHS will still have the ability to sit on the board of CARNA after this separation is mandated and after this has gone through. But the way this legislation is worded, it states that nobody who is a member of a union or advocacy organization for these employees may sit on the board of a regulatory college. So we have an advantage here where management from AHS, who can be involved in the discipline process of a member of that college under AHS, can also sit on the board of CARNA. So a nurse which is working under AHS and who may have a complaint filed by managers within AHS that is indeed absolved of that complaint under AHS may still face a complaint under CARNA and have members of management from AHS on the board of CARNA, who could then be involved in a process of adjudication on a similar complaint filed against that member, but no member of that nurses union who may be on their side of things is allowed to be a member of CARNA. Now, one, of course, hopes that all members of the board would, of course, set aside any of their previous affiliations or thoughts. But we know, Mr. Chair, that we are all human, or Mr. Speaker. So this is, I think, something of some concern, whatever other reasons there might be. And I do recognize that CARNA itself has come out in favor of this particular piece and indeed was part of the government's press release. But I think it is worth considering some of the imbalance that is being brought in here, particularly as we have had this government bring in Bill 47, which has also been under debate in this Assembly, where they are again also very heavily tilting the balance against employees. while handing much more power to employers where we already have an existing imbalance. And knowing this is something we have seen this government do time and again, indeed bringing in legislation which has been extremely antagonistic towards the labor movement in this province. So I do have some concern that this particular provision that's included here in Bill 46, in this particular situation, is indeed carrying on that antagonism of the government, that tilting of the scale. And again, putting workers at a disadvantage when they are dealing in situations when they are in conflict with the employer. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member. We are on RA1. Are there any Honourable Members looking to join debate? Seeing none. On the amendment as proposed by the Honourable Member for Calgary Mountain View, all those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. No. That is defeated. Moving back to the bill, Bill 46. Are there any Honourable Members looking to join debate? I see the Honourable Member for Edmonton Gold Bar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to rise and offer my thoughts on Bill 46, the Health Statutes Amendment Act. And I want to, first of all, thank my friends from Edmonton Whitemud, Edmonton Rutherford, and Edmonton City Centre for their thoughtful interventions in this debate. And certainly my friend from Edmonton City Centre has done an excellent job as health critic in his time in that role. And of course, we've seen that again in his brief comments in response to my friend from Edmonton Rutherford regarding this bill. My friend from Edmonton Whitemud, in her comments on this bill, raised some information around the context within which we are debating these changes to health statutes. And of course, it's very concerning to me to see the latest COVID numbers. We exceeded 1,800 new cases yesterday, a new case record. And this is following days and days of setting new daily COVID case records here in the province of Alberta. And I just want to say that my heart goes out to all of the families who have lost loved ones to this disease, especially the 14 people who died yesterday as a result of this disease. And that my thoughts and prayers are with the dozens of people who are currently fighting for their lives in ICUs, struggling with this disease. And I sincerely hope that all of them make it through okay. It is concerning to me, Mr. Speaker, that these kinds of comments expressing empathy with the victims of COVID-19 are hard to come by. And I've certainly heard from my constituents when they're expressing their many concerns about how this government is managing the COVID pandemic. Wrapped up in all of their comments is their shock and dismay at the lack of empathy that has been displayed by the Premier and members of Executive Council with respect to the victims of COVID. And so I just want those people to know that we here in the official opposition do care. And we don't think that any of these people had this coming to them, regardless of what their age is or what their other underlying health conditions are. All of these deaths are preventable. Yeah. If only we had a government that was actually interested in doing the work of preventing the spread of COVID-19. And I think this Health Statutes Amendment Act, the fact that we are debating rather minor changes, I would argue, to things like the ABC Benefits Corporations Act, at a time when 1,800 people were just notified today that they had a COVID diagnosis, and 2% of those can expect to die. What's the government's priority? Making sure that the Alberta Blue Cross Act changes to represent the name of that organization. I'm not saying that that shouldn't have been done. But it's incredibly troubling to me and to all of my constituents in Edmonton Gold Bar that that's what this government is focusing on instead of actually dealing with the pandemic at hand. It's incredibly troubling, Mr. Speaker, and I can promise members opposite that even though the vaccine seems to be on the horizon and hopefully we will be out of this pandemic in the coming months, potentially a year, the people of Alberta will not forget how this government turned their backs on them during this significant health crisis. And not only that, couldn't even be bothered to offer some kind words to the families who have lost loved ones. It's awful. And the people of Alberta will not forget, and I'm certain that they will not forgive the members opposite for the callous attitude that they've taken to the victims of COVID-19. Now, my friend from Edmonton Whitemud may raise some concerns with respect to health privacy and the way that health records will be dealt with. And there are a couple of thoughts that I have on that matter, Mr. Speaker. It's interesting to me the contrast that the government has shown today with respect to how they want to manage information in the province of Alberta. Because earlier today in question period, I asked the minister whether or not he would just freely, voluntarily release data related to the use of parks in our province. This is something that exists, that the legislation says that the people of Alberta have the right to know and see. And the minister refused to release that information to the people of Alberta. Even though we have a legal right to it, he stood up and said no, that he will not comply with the multiple requests that have been made by members of the public to see that information. But when it comes to health privacy and for health information, well, it's their view that anybody should have the right to see that, Mr. Speaker. So that's a curious contrast to me, that something that is seemingly uncontroversial and should be a matter of routine, like parks usage data, that the government goes to extreme lengths to keep that from public view. But Albertans' healthcare records, incredibly private, incredibly personal information, that this legislation will make it freely available to anybody, regardless of where they live in the world, to see them. So it boggles my mind, Mr. Speaker, that we have such divergent approaches to managing information in this province. And that's why I will not be supporting this bill, Mr. Speaker, because I don't think that it's right that this private and personal health care information be released into the wild the way it is, in direct violation of the recommendations made by the Privacy Commissioner. And now, I've heard from many of my constituents wondering why it is they think that Albertans' healthcare information needs to be released so freely to people outside of their jurisdictions. And I think the answer is pretty plain to see. There are certainly many patients, many constituents in Edmonton Gold Bar whose doctors have picked up stakes and have left the province, Mr. Speaker, because of this government's war on physicians. So now my constituents, if they want to continue getting care from that doctor, will probably have to call them up on the phone or make a Zoom appointment or some other kind of telecare appointment, because those people have picked up and left the province, Mr. Speaker. So maybe that's why the minister and members of Executive Council have decided to release these healthcare records into the wild like this. Because they know full well that doctors are leaving the province in droves, and that many of these constituents who are being left to find health care will have no option but to follow their doctors virtually to whatever jurisdiction it is that they're going to. Mr. Speaker, and I can tell you that that's not gone over well with my constituents, and they are certainly not buying the stories that the government is spinning with relation to the management of the healthcare system. And it's interesting, Mr. Speaker, of course, the hubris that the government has displayed in taking on the war on doctors and actually having the temerity to dispute what the doctors are saying with regards to what's going on with healthcare in the province of Alberta. I mean, Mr. Speaker, as you know, not very many people hold politicians in very high regard. The things that we say, just because of the positions that we hold, are automatically viewed with a great deal of skepticism, and that's not true of doctors. People trust doctors more than they trust any other person, any other profession in the entire province, and yet the Minister of Health seems to think that just by standing up and claiming that he's telling the truth every day, he's going to actually be more trustworthy on the issue of healthcare and healthcare management than doctors.
They trust nurses too.
They trust nurses as well, and I thank my friend from Edmonton, Lenora, for expanding the definition of healthcare worker, because she's absolutely right. Albertans will trust any healthcare worker before they trust this minister or any members of Executive Council. And I think the minister would be wise to remember who has more trust on the issue of healthcare management and perhaps conduct himself accordingly. And it's on that issue of trust, Mr. Speaker, that I want to offer some final comments. Because when this piece of legislation was introduced, he was questioned on whether or not he had conducted consultations with the Privacy Commissioner about the changes that he's making to the legislation governing healthcare records. And he actually said in public that he had conducted such consultations and that the Privacy Commissioner had actually approved the changes. It turns out that that wasn't true, Mr. Speaker. The Privacy Commissioner had to take the extraordinary step of publicly putting out a statement saying that what the Minister of Health had said about the changes that are being proposed in this piece of legislation were not true. That's extraordinary. Or it would be extraordinary if we hadn't seen this health minister in action for the last 18 months. Right? We ask him if he's driving doctors out of the province. He says no. We ask him if he's firing 11,000 frontline healthcare workers. He says that's not true. We ask him if we asked the government in March, February, March, should we be worried about this COVID thing? No. Don't be concerned about it. And then March 17th, the province is shut down. All along, we said, oh, does the government have enough contact tracers to manage COVID? Yes, absolutely. Turns out that wasn't true. Do we have enough ICU beds? Do we have enough staff to manage this pandemic? Yes, absolutely. Nothing to worry about, nothing to see here. Well, we've got the worst case count of any province in the country, and people are dying in greater numbers per capita than any other province in the country. And the problem is that There are two problems, Mr. Speaker. It's this repeated behavior by the Minister of Health of telling us things that are quite separate from the actual facts, and his refusal to even try to rehabilitate his reputation. We were here on Monday asking him to release government documents related to discussions that his department had with the College of Dentists about the changes to the fee guide. Minister stood up, swore up and down that he just tried to discourage the dentists, but he couldn't possibly do anything to dissuade them from hiking dental fees by 5%. But when I told the health minister that the people of Alberta are having a problem trusting him on this issue, in addition to every other issue that he has to deal with as health minister, and that perhaps releasing the documents, if they could prove what he said was true, would go a little bit towards rehabilitating his reputation, he failed to take advantage of that opportunity that we put before him. And now again here we have an opportunity during debate on this bill.
Thank you, Honourable Member. 29-2A is available. Seeing none, are there any Honourable Members looking to join debate on Bill 46, Health Statutes Amendment Act 2020, number 2? Seeing none, I am prepared to ask the question. The Honourable Minister of Justice and Solicitor General has moved second reading of Bill 46, Health Statutes Amendment Act 2020, number 2, on behalf of the Honourable Minister of Health. Does the Assembly agree with the motion for second reading? All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. No. I believe that the ayes have it. A division has been called. Call in the members.
division has been called on second reading of Bill 46, Health Statutes Amendment Act 2020, number 2. All those in favour, please rise and be counted.
Ms. Lovely, Ms. Armstrong-Hominack, Ms. Goodrich, Mr. Getson, Ms. Furr, Mr. Lowen, Mr. Turton, Mr. Ellis, Mr. Neudorf, the Honourable Mr. Schweitzer, Ms. Rosen, Mr. Walker, Mr. Amory, Mr. Rosewell, Mr. Jones, Mr. Yassine, and Mr. Smith.
Thank you. All those members opposed, please rise and be counted.
Mr. Xavier, Mr. Schmidt, Member Hoffman, Mr. Egan, Mr. Fian, Ms. Pancholi, Mr. Shepherd.
Mr. Speaker, total for the motion, 17, total against, 7.
That motion is carried. Bill 46 has been read a second time. Oh, I'm taking it from.
Bill 46, Health Statutes Amendment Act 2020, number 2, is now read a second time.
I'm starting to get used to this place. I see the Honourable Deputy Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We made some excellent progress this week. I move that we adjourn to 1:30 p.m. on December 7th, 2020.
The Honourable Deputy Government House Leader has moved that the Assembly adjourn until Monday afternoon at 1:30 p.m. Does the Assembly agree? All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. I think the ayes have it. We are adjourned until Monday at 1:30 p.m.